When a widow's fury collides with a powerful stranger's pride, an entire town will be forced to choose sides. In one explosive moment, Evelyn Harper's world shattered, not from loss, but from rage. The dust hadn't even settled when she realized what she'd done. Publicly humiliated the most dangerous man in the territory. Now, as corrupt forces circle like vultures and violence threatens everything she's built, Evelyn must decide: surrender to those who'd see her destroyed, or fight back with a courage she didn't know she possessed. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this tale travels. The summer heat pressed down on Redstone Crossing like a baker's palm testing risen dough. Firm, relentless, unforgiving. By 10 o'clock in the morning, the dusty main street shimmered with mirages that made the wooden storefronts dance and waver like they were painted on silk instead of nailed to honest timber. Most sensible folks had retreated indoors, but Evelyn Harper had no such luxury. She stood in the doorway of Harper's Bakery, her flour-dusted apron clinging to her frame, watching the street with eyes that had learned to notice everything. At 28, Evelyn had the kind of beauty that hardship had refined rather than destroyed. Sharp cheekbones, dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, and eyes the color of storm clouds that missed nothing and forgave less. 3 years of widowhood had taught her that much. "Mama, they're burning." The small voice pulled her attention back inside, where 6-year-old Sarah stood on a wooden crate beside the massive cast-iron stove, her face flushed from the heat. "Step back, sweetheart." Evelyn moved with practiced efficiency, pulling the tray of rolls from the oven just as their tops achieved that perfect golden brown that her customers had come to expect. 24 rolls. She'd sold 43 yesterday. The day before, 37. The numbers told a story she didn't want to read. Business was dying. It wasn't the quality of her bread. Everyone in Redstone Crossing knew that Harper's Bakery produced the finest goods in 3 counties. It wasn't even the prices, which she'd kept fair even as flour costs climbed. No, the problem was much simpler and infinitely more complicated. People were scared. Scared of being seen shopping at a widow's establishment when Marcus Rhodes, president of Redstone Bank and Trust, had made it abundantly clear that widows who didn't accept his generous offers were bad for business. Scared of crossing the most powerful family in the territory over something as trivial as bread. Evelyn set the rolls on the cooling rack with more force than necessary, the metal clanging against the wooden counter. "Are we going to be okay, Mama?" Sarah asked, her small hand finding Evelyn's. The question pierced straight through Evelyn's carefully maintained armor. She knelt down, bringing herself eye level with her daughter, and smoothed back a strand of honey-colored hair that had escaped Sarah's braid. "We're going to be just fine," she said, injecting a confidence into her voice that her bank account couldn't support. "Your papa built this bakery with his own hands, and nobody is going to take it from us." Sarah's face brightened with the uncomplicated faith that only children possessed. "Papa was strong." "Papa was strong," Evelyn agreed, standing and turning back to her work before the burning behind her eyes could transform into tears. James had been strong enough to work himself to death, trying to build a legacy for his family, strong enough to keep smiling even when the fever took hold, strong enough to make Evelyn promise, with his last coherent breath, that she'd never give up on their dream. She'd kept that promise for 3 years. 3 years of 14-hour days, of choosing between new shoes for Sarah and flour for tomorrow's batch, of swallowing her pride and her rage every time Marcus Rhodes and his predatory daughter Isabella walked past her shop without even the courtesy of a glance. The Rhodes family owned half the town and controlled the other half through carefully orchestrated debt and intimidation. Marcus Rhodes held mortgages on nearly every building on Main Street. His daughter Isabella held court over the town's social scene with the casual cruelty of someone who'd never been told no. Together, they represented everything that was wrong with Redstone Crossing, and everything Evelyn was powerless to fight. Until today. Evelyn was arranging the fresh rolls in the display window when she heard it, the thunder of hooves moving too fast for the crowded street, accompanied by shouts of alarm. She looked up just in time to see a massive black stallion careening around the corner, its rider struggling for control. "Sarah, get back!" Evelyn barely had time to push her daughter toward the rear of the shop before the horse, wild-eyed and frothing, mounted the boardwalk. The rider, a tall man in a dusty black coat, yanked hard on the reins, and the stallion reared. Time compressed into a series of crystalline moments, the horse's hooves coming down inches from her doorframe, the sickening crash as the animal's flank caught her carefully arranged outdoor display, the almost musical sound of breaking glass as her morning's work, 36 fresh loaves and 2 full trays of rolls tumbled into the street. The bread hit the dirt like fallen soldiers. Evelyn stared at the destruction, her mind unable to process what her eyes were seeing. Those loaves represented 6 hours of work, $2 in flour, and the only money she'd make today. They were also the last of her inventory before she'd have to make a choice between buying more supplies or paying this month's mortgage payment to the Rhodes bank. The rider dismounted, moving toward her with what looked like concern. "Ma'am, I'm terribly—" Something inside Evelyn snapped. 3 years of grief, 3 years of fear, 3 years of watching her dreams crumble like day-old pastry, while people like the Rhodes family grew fat on the suffering of others. It all came pouring out in a torrent of rage that surprised even her. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Her voice cut across the street like a whip, sharp enough that pedestrians stopped to stare. "Do you think this is just bread? Do you think this is just some trivial inconvenience you can apologize away?" The man opened his mouth, but Evelyn wasn't finished. Years of swallowed words, of bitten tongue and forced smiles, of yes-sirring and thank you ma'aming to people who looked through her like glass, it all came rushing out. "This is my life in that dirt. This is my daughter's meals for the week. This is the mortgage payment I won't be able to make now." She advanced on him, heedless of the crowd gathering, heedless of Sarah's small gasp from inside the shop, heedless of everything except the red haze of fury that had been building for 3 years and now demanded release. "This is everything I have left of my husband's dream, and you've destroyed it with your recklessness and your complete callous disregard for anyone but yourself." The stranger stood perfectly still, his hat shadowing most of his face. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the kind of bearing that suggested he wasn't accustomed to being addressed this way. Something about his stillness should have warned Evelyn, but she was beyond warnings now. "You people are all the same," she continued, her voice rising. "You ride through here like you own the territory, like the rest of us are just obstacles in your path. You take, and take, and take, and you never once consider the cost to anyone else. Well, I have nothing left to give." The last words came out as almost a sob. Evelyn felt her face burning, felt the eyes of half the town on her, felt Sarah's small hand gripping her skirt from behind. The enormity of what she'd just done, screaming at a stranger in public, making a scene, drawing exactly the kind of attention that could give the Rhodes family more ammunition, crashed over her like a wave. But she couldn't seem to stop. "So yes," she said, her voice dropping to something cold and hard and final, "you owe me an apology. You owe me compensation for every loaf in that dirt. And you owe me an explanation for why men like you think you can destroy everything someone has worked for and walk away without consequences." The silence that followed was absolute. The stranger stood motionless for what felt like an eternity. Then, slowly, he removed his hat. Luke Carter had the kind of face that made women forget their words. Strong jaw, eyes the color of honey in sunlight, dark hair slightly too long to be properly fashionable. But it was the expression in those eyes that made Evelyn's breath catch. Not anger at her outburst, not offense at her accusations, but something that looked almost like understanding. "You're absolutely right," he said quietly. Of all the responses Evelyn had expected, agreement wasn't among them. She blinked, her momentum disrupted. "I was reckless," Luke continued, his voice carrying despite its softness. "I'm new to the territory, and I pushed thunder too hard coming into town. That's on me." He looked at the ruined bread in the street, then back at Evelyn. "You said that's your mortgage payment?" "I don't need your pity," Evelyn said, but the fire had gone out of her voice. "Not pity, accountability." Luke reached into his coat and pulled out a leather wallet. "How much?" "What?" "For the bread, for your work, for your time and your materials and whatever profit you would have made." He met her eyes steadily. "How much?" Evelyn's mind went blank. In all her imagined scenarios of confronting those who made her life difficult, none had involved the offender actually offering to make things right. $10. At least. Luke counted out $15 in crisp bills and held them out. For the bread, and for my inexcusable carelessness. She stared at the money, then at him, suspicion flooding in to fill the space rage had vacated. Who are you? Luke Carter. He said it simply, like it should mean nothing. It meant everything. The name rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat. Evelyn heard it in the whispers. Luke Carter. The Carter Ranch. Bought out the Jacobson spread last month. Biggest landowner in 3 counties now. Has the governor's ear. Made his fortune in cattle and silver. Richer than Rhodes, some say. The blood drained from Evelyn's face. She'd just publicly berated possibly the most powerful man in the territory. More than that, she'd called him callous, reckless, heartless. She'd compared him to the Rhodes family, and there was no insult more cutting in her vocabulary. I didn't know, she whispered. Why should that matter? Luke asked. You were right. I destroyed your work. The fact that I can afford to replace it doesn't make it less destroyed. He pressed the bills into her hand when she didn't take them. His fingers were calloused, she noticed absently. Working hands, not the soft hands of men who let others do their labor. Evelyn looked down at the money, more than she usually made in a week, then back at Luke. I shouldn't have... The things I said were honest. Luke's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. I appreciate honesty. It's rarer than you'd think. Behind her, Evelyn heard Sarah's small voice. Mama? Is everything okay? Luke's attention shifted past Evelyn. Something in his expression softened further. Is this your daughter? Sarah, stay inside, Evelyn said quickly, turning. But Sarah had already moved to the doorway, her blue eyes wide with curiosity rather than fear. You have a beautiful shop, Luke said, addressing Sarah directly. I'm sorry my horse frightened you. Thunder's scared of his shadow, Sarah said with the blunt honesty of childhood. Papa used to say scared horses need extra kindness. The simplicity of it seemed to catch Luke off guard. He knelt down, bringing himself to Sarah's level much as Evelyn had done earlier. Your papa sounds like he was a wise man. He died, Sarah said matter-of-factly. But Mama says he's watching over us. Evelyn saw something flicker across Luke's face. Recognition, maybe, or shared grief. He stood slowly, his attention returning to Evelyn. I truly am sorry, Mrs. Harper. For all of it. The use of her name, he'd somehow learned it already, probably from the shop sign or the whispers of the crowd, made everything suddenly, intensely real. Evelyn became acutely aware of her appearance. Flour-stained apron, hair escaping its bun, face probably still flushed from her outburst. She looked like exactly what she was, a struggling widow who just made a spectacular fool of herself in front of the most powerful man in the territory. The money is too much, she managed. It's not nearly enough. Luke settled his hat back on his head. But it's a start toward making this right. He paused, seeming to consider something. You lease this property, Mrs. Harper? The question sent ice through Evelyn's veins. Yes. From Rhodes Bank? How did you... But of course he would know. Men like Luke Carter made it their business to know things. Yes. Luke nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. I see. Those 2 words carried enough weight to make Evelyn's stomach drop. She'd just publicly humiliated herself in front of the one man who might have enough power to stand against the Rhodes family, and instead of courting his favor, she'd screamed at him like a mad woman. Mr. Carter, she began, but he raised a hand. Luke, please. Luke, she amended, the informality feeling strange on her tongue. I spoke out of turn. I was upset, and I took it out on you, and that wasn't... I shouldn't have... You should have, he interrupted gently. Someone needed to tell me that the way I ride could hurt people. Better it be you than someone who ends up under Thunder's hooves. He glanced at the ruined bread again. Will you be able to recover from this? Truthfully? The question was too direct, too personal, too knowing. Evelyn felt her defenses slam back into place. I'll manage. I always do. That's not what I asked. They stared at each other, and Evelyn felt something shift in the air between them, a recognition of kindred spirits maybe, or mutual stubbornness. Luke had the look of a man who didn't accept easy answers, and Evelyn had spent 3 years perfecting the art of giving them. Thank you for the compensation, she said firmly. It's more than generous, and I appreciate it. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a shop to clean. It was a dismissal, and they both knew it. Luke studied her for a moment longer, then nodded. Of course. Again, my apologies. He turned toward Thunder, who had calmed considerably and was now being held by one of the town boys. Luke swung into the saddle with easy grace, then looked back at Evelyn one last time. Mrs. Harper, for what it's worth, I admire your spirit. Then he was gone, riding at a careful walk down Main Street, leaving Evelyn standing in the wreckage of her morning's work with $15 in her hand and the entire town staring at her. The whispers started immediately. Did you see her face? Screaming at Luke Carter like he was a common ranch hand. Poor thing doesn't know who she's dealing with. Rhodes won't like this, mark my words. Evelyn ignored them all. She knelt down and began gathering the ruined loaves, her hands shaking with the aftershock of adrenaline. Sarah appeared beside her, small fingers reaching for a roll that was more dust than bread. Mama, why were you so angry? How to explain to a 6-year-old that sometimes rage was the only thing standing between you and complete collapse, that sometimes you had to scream or you'd shatter, that sometimes the wrong person became the target for all the fury you couldn't direct at the people who truly deserved it? I was wrong to yell like that, Evelyn said instead. Even when we're upset, we should try to be kind. But he said you were right. He was being gracious. What's gracious? It means he's a better person than most. Evelyn stood, her arms full of ruined bread. Come on, sweetheart. We have work to do. They spent the next hour cleaning up the mess and salvaging what they could. The $15 Luke had given her sat on the counter like an accusation. It was more than fair compensation. It was more than generous. It was also, Evelyn suspected, more complicated than a simple apology for damaged goods. Men like Luke Carter didn't hand out money to every shopkeeper who yelled at them. Men like Luke Carter didn't kneel down to speak with the children of widows. Men like Luke Carter didn't look at struggling women with understanding instead of contempt. So what did Luke Carter want? The question haunted her through the rest of the day. Business was predictably slow. Only 3 customers, all of whom made pointed comments about the excitement this morning, before making their small purchases and hurrying out. By the time Evelyn flipped the sign to closed, she'd made $1.75 from sales. Combined with Luke's $15, it was enough to cover the mortgage payment with a little left over for supplies. She should have felt relieved. Instead, she felt uneasy. Evelyn was locking the front door when she saw them. Isabella Rhodes and her father Marcus, walking down the opposite side of the street. Isabella wore a dress that probably cost more than Evelyn's yearly income, her dark hair perfectly coiffed, her parasol tilted at an angle that suggested she'd practiced the pose in a mirror. Marcus Rhodes looked exactly like what he was, a predator in expensive clothing, his silver hair and distinguished features hiding a nature as warm as a rattlesnake's. They weren't looking at the bakery. They were in deep conversation, Marcus's head bent toward his daughters, both of their expressions intent. But as they passed, Isabella's gaze flicked toward Evelyn's shop, and her mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. The message was clear. We know what happened today. We're watching. Evelyn forced herself to maintain eye contact until they passed. Only when they'd turned the corner did she allow herself to lean against the doorframe, her heart hammering. Mama? Sarah tugged at her skirt. I'm hungry. I know, baby. Let's go upstairs and see what we can make for dinner. They lived in the 2 rooms above the bakery, a living space that was generous compared to some, but felt cramped with the weight of all their memories. James had built the furniture himself, the small table where they ate, the narrow bed they shared, the rocking chair where Evelyn had nursed Sarah as an infant. Every piece carried his mark, his care, his love. Evelyn made dinner from what she had on hand, bread, of course, and cheese, and some dried apples. Simple fare, But Sarah didn't complain. She never did, even when Evelyn knew she must notice that their meals had gotten smaller, their portions more carefully measured. After dinner, after Sarah had been bathed and put to bed with a story, Evelyn sat in the rocking chair by the window and looked out at the dark street below. The $15 sat on the small table, still folded exactly as Luke had handed it to her. She should be thinking about the mortgage payment, about tomorrow's baking schedule, about how to stretch her dwindling supplies. Instead, she found herself replaying the morning's encounter, the way Luke had stood perfectly still while she raged at him, the understanding in his eyes, the gentleness in his voice when he spoke to Sarah. "I admire your spirit." No one had said anything like that to Evelyn in 3 years. No one looked at her and saw anything beyond poor widow Harper or that difficult woman with the bakery. Certainly no one admired her, for her spirit or anything else. It was probably a meaningless pleasantry. Rich men were good at those. Except Luke hadn't seemed like he was being polite. He'd seemed sincere. Evelyn closed her eyes and pressed her fingers against her temples. She was reading too much into a simple encounter. Luke Carter was a wealthy rancher who'd accidentally damaged her property and paid for it. That was the beginning and end of the story. The fact that he'd been kind about it didn't mean anything except that he had better manners than most men of his station. Tomorrow, life would return to normal. She'd bake her bread, serve her few customers, count her meager profits, and pretend not to notice when the Rhodes family walked past without acknowledging her existence. That was her life now. That was her reality. She was reaching for the lamp to extinguish it when she heard the knock. 3 sharp raps on the bakery's front door, authoritative and demanding. Evelyn froze. No one came calling at this hour unless something was wrong. Her mind immediately jumped to Sarah. But no, Sarah was asleep in the next room, safe and sound. Another knock, harder this time. Evelyn descended the stairs quietly, her heart in her throat. Through the window in the door she could make out a male figure, but the darkness obscured his features. She almost didn't answer, almost retreated back upstairs and pretended she hadn't heard. But she'd spent 3 years being afraid, and something about today had used up her capacity for cowardice. She opened the door. The man standing on her doorstep wore the uniform of the Territorial Land Office. He was young, probably not yet 25, with nervous eyes and an official-looking envelope in his hand. "Mrs. Evelyn Harper?" "Yes." "I have a document that requires your immediate attention, ma'am." He held out the envelope like it might bite him. "I'm required by law to deliver it personally and witness your receipt of it." Evelyn took the envelope with numb fingers. "What is this?" "I'm not at liberty to discuss the contents, ma'am. I just need you to sign here acknowledging receipt." He produced a clipboard and pencil. She signed, her hand surprisingly steady despite the dread pooling in her stomach. The young man tipped his hat, mumbled something about sorry for the late hour, and practically fled down the street. Evelyn closed the door and stared at the envelope. Heavy paper, expensive. The seal was official, Territorial Land Office, just as the messenger's uniform had indicated. In the upper left corner, written in precise script, R.E., Property Deed, Main Street Lot 7, Redstone Crossing, her shop's lot. With shaking hands, Evelyn broke the seal and unfolded the document. Legal language swam before her eyes, dense and incomprehensible. She forced herself to focus, to read slowly, to understand what she was being told. The first paragraph made her grab for the doorframe. The second paragraph made her sit down hard on the stairs. By the third paragraph, she understood exactly what had happened, and exactly why Luke Carter had been so interested in who held her lease. The property her bakery occupied, along with 3 other lots on Main Street, had been purchased. Not by the Rhodes Bank, which currently held the leases. Not by some distant investment company. The new owner, as of that very afternoon, was listed clearly in bold type, Luke Carter, Carter Ranch and Holdings. And there, in the final paragraph, was the detail that made Evelyn's vision blur. Lease terms for current tenant. Mrs. Evelyn Harper, amended as follows. Monthly rent reduced from $12 to $1. Lease term extended from 1 year to 10 years, with option to purchase property at current market value at any point during lease period. Existing debt to previous property owner hereby canceled. New terms effective immediately. Evelyn read it 3 times, then a fourth. The words didn't change. Luke Carter had bought her building. Luke Carter had reduced her rent to almost nothing. Luke Carter had, with a stroke of a pen, eliminated her most pressing financial burden and given her something she hadn't had in 3 years: security. She should have felt grateful. Instead, she felt terrified, because men like Luke Carter didn't bestow favors without expecting something in return. And Evelyn had learned through bitter experience that there was no such thing as free kindness from powerful men. The question wasn't whether Luke wanted something from her. The question was what, and what it would cost her to refuse. Evelyn sat on the stairs of her bakery, holding the document that had just changed her life, and waited for the other shoe to drop. She didn't have to wait long. Morning came too soon and brought with it a clarity that sleep had denied Evelyn. She'd spent most of the night staring at the ceiling, the land office document lying on the table like unexploded ordnance, while her mind spun through every possible explanation for Luke Carter's extraordinary generosity. None of them were good. By the time pale sunlight crept through her window, Evelyn had constructed and discarded a dozen theories. Luke wanted her property for some business venture and was softening her up before making an offer. Luke was the kind of wealthy man who collected obligations from vulnerable women. Luke had some connection to the Rhodes family, and this was an elaborate setup. Each theory felt simultaneously plausible and absurd, but they all shared one common thread. Nobody reduced a widow's rent by 90% out of simple kindness. Sarah stirred in the bed beside her, and Evelyn forced herself to rise. Whatever Luke Carter's game was, she still had bread to bake and a daughter to feed. The world didn't pause for her paranoia. She was downstairs before dawn, her hands moving through the familiar rhythm of mixing dough while her mind continued its relentless analysis. The changed lease terms meant she could afford to buy better flour, could stock more variety, could actually save money for the first time in 3 years. It also meant she was now beholden to Luke Carter in ways she couldn't begin to calculate. The knock came just as she was sliding the first batch into the oven. Evelyn's stomach clenched. She wiped flour from her hands and moved to the door, half expecting to see the land office messenger with another document, another piece of her life being rearranged without her consent. Instead, she found Luke Carter himself, hatless in the early morning light, holding a bouquet of wildflowers that looked absurdly delicate in his work-roughened hands. "Mrs. Harper." He nodded respectfully. "I hope I'm not calling too early." Evelyn stared at him, then at the flowers, then back at him. "Mr. Carter." "Luke, please. It's 5:30 in the morning." "I know." He had the decency to look slightly sheepish. "I wanted to catch you before you opened, and before the town gossips could make this into more than it is." "And what is it?" Evelyn kept her hand on the door, ready to close it if his answer didn't satisfy her. Luke glanced past her into the bakery, where the warm glow of the ovens created a pocket of light against the pre-dawn darkness. "Could we talk inside?" "Just for a few minutes." Every instinct screamed at Evelyn to refuse. Letting him in would fuel exactly the kind of gossip he claimed to want to avoid. It would also put her alone in a room with a man she didn't trust, didn't understand, and couldn't predict. But she also couldn't afford to offend him, not when he literally owned the ground beneath her feet. She stepped back, allowing him entry. "I have bread in the oven. This will have to be brief." "Of course." Luke entered with careful respect, removing his hat and standing near the door, as if to demonstrate he wouldn't intrude further than permitted. He held out the flowers. "These are for you, an apology for any distress yesterday's transaction may have caused." Evelyn took the wildflowers mechanically. Indian paintbrush, lupine, wild roses. Someone had taken time to select them carefully. "You bought my building." "I did. Why?" Luke's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted, a weighing, perhaps, of how much truth to tell. "May I be frank with you, Mrs. Harper?" "I'd prefer it." "I've spent the last month learning about Redstone Crossing, who holds power, who holds grudges, who's vulnerable and who's protected. Your name came up in several conversations." He met her gaze steadily. "Always in the context of Marcus Rhodes's ongoing efforts to acquire your property." The bluntness of it caught Evelyn off guard. "I see." The general consensus around town is that Rhodes wants this lot, Because it's one of the last prime Main Street properties he doesn't control. The specific consensus is that he's waiting for you to default on your lease so he can claim the building and evict you without the mess of a forced sale. Evelyn's jaw tightened. Hearing her fears spoken aloud by a near stranger made them more real, more dangerous. That's quite an assessment from someone who's only been here a month. I'm good at reading situations. Luke's tone remained neutral, factual. I'm also good at recognizing when someone's being systematically cornered. Rhodes has been buying up debt around town, calling in loans early, raising rents on properties he controls. All perfectly legal, all designed to consolidate his power. And you decided to interfere because I don't like bullies. The simplicity of the statement rang with conviction. And because when I saw you yesterday, saw your courage in standing up to a stranger you thought had wronged you, I recognized something I don't see often in this territory. What's that? Someone who won't break. The words settled between them like a challenge. Evelyn felt her defensive walls threatening to crack under the weight of something that sounded too much like respect. Mr. Carter, Luke. Luke, she conceded, frustration bleeding into her voice. I appreciate whatever this is, the flowers, the reduced rent, the noble sentiments about bullies. But I'm not a fool. Men don't spend money on widows they barely know without expecting something in return. You're right. Luke didn't flinch from the accusation. I do expect something in return. There it was. Evelyn felt her spine straighten, her chin lift. And what would that be? I expect you to succeed. Luke gestured around the bakery, taking in the well-maintained equipment, the scrupulously clean workspace, the obvious care in every detail. I expect you to build the business your husband dreamed of. I expect you to provide for your daughter without having to choose between rent and food. And I expect that when Rhodes realizes he's lost his leverage over you, you'll stand firm instead of being intimidated into selling to him anyway. Evelyn searched his face for the lie, the manipulation, the hidden agenda. She found none of them, only a directness that was almost brutal in its honesty. Why do you care about any of that? Something flickered across Luke's expression. Old pain, maybe, or old anger. Let's just say I have personal experience with men like Marcus Rhodes, and I learned a long time ago that the best way to fight them is to protect the people they prey on. Before Evelyn could respond, a small voice piped up from the stairs. Mama? Who's here? Sarah appeared in her nightgown, her hair a tangled mess, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She spotted Luke and stopped, her expression cycling through surprise, recognition, and finally curiosity. It's the man from yesterday, she announced. The one with the scared horse. Luke's entire demeanor transformed. The intensity that had filled the room moments before softened into something gentler, more approachable. He crouched down, bringing himself to Sarah's level for the second time in as many days. Good morning, Sarah. I hope thunder didn't give you nightmares. No. Sarah patted closer, apparently unconcerned by the stranger in her mother's bakery. Mama says nightmares are just our brains practicing being brave. Your mama's very wise. Luke glanced at Evelyn with something that might have been amusement. Is she teaching you to be brave too? She's teaching me to bake bread. That's harder. Sarah peered at the flowers in Evelyn's hands. Those are pretty. Did you pick them yourself? I did. Do you know their names? That one's lupine, and that's Indian paintbrush. Papa used to bring Mama flowers like these. The casual mention of James seemed to catch Luke off guard. He stood slowly, his attention returning to Evelyn with renewed understanding. He had good taste. He had many things, Evelyn said quietly. Sarah, go get dressed. We have a busy day ahead. Sarah hesitated, clearly wanting to continue the conversation, but Evelyn's tone left no room for negotiation. With a small sigh, she retreated back upstairs. The moment she was gone, Evelyn set the flowers on the counter with more force than necessary. Don't do that. Do what? Don't charm my daughter. Don't make her think that we're... She struggled for words. Don't make her hope for things that aren't going to happen. Luke's expression grew serious. What things would those be, Mrs. Harper? You know exactly what I mean. Evelyn crossed her arms, defensive. Sarah's 6 years old. She doesn't understand complicated adult arrangements. She sees a kind man bringing flowers and talking gently, and she starts imagining stories, possibilities. Would that be so terrible? Yes. The word came out harder than Evelyn intended. Because when you get bored of playing benefactor and move on to whatever your next project is, I'll be the one explaining to her why the nice man doesn't visit anymore. I'll be the one picking up the pieces when she realizes that people who seem to care usually don't. Luke absorbed this without visible reaction. When he spoke, his voice was measured, careful. You think I'm playing at something? I think you're a wealthy man who's used to getting what he wants and doesn't always consider the collateral damage. Evelyn met his gaze without wavering. I think you saw a situation that offended your sense of justice, and you acted on it, and that's probably even admirable. But I also think that once the novelty wears off, once you've proven whatever point you're trying to prove to Marcus Rhodes, you'll forget all about the widow and her bakery. You're wrong. Am I? Yes. Luke stepped closer, and Evelyn had to resist the urge to back away. I don't forget people who matter, and whether you believe it or not, you matter. The intensity in his voice made Evelyn's breath catch. She wanted to dismiss it as manipulation, as practiced charm, as anything except what it sounded like, genuine conviction. You don't know me, she said. I'd like to. The words hung in the air between them, laden with implications Evelyn couldn't afford to examine. Behind her, the oven timer chimed, giving her an excuse to break eye contact. Your bread, Luke said. Yes. Evelyn moved to the oven with relief, pulling out the first batch of perfectly golden loaves. The familiar task steadied her, gave her something to do with her hands besides clutch at her apron like a nervous girl. Was there anything else, Mr. Carter? She heard him sigh softly. Luke. And yes, actually, there was a business matter I wanted to discuss. Of course there was. Evelyn set down the bread tray with careful control. I'm listening. My ranch employs 43 men year-round, more during roundup season. Right now, we're buying bread and baked goods from a supplier in Millbrook, 30 miles south. The quality is inconsistent, the delivery is unreliable, and I'd prefer to support local business when possible. He paused. Would you be interested in a contract to supply the ranch? Evelyn turned slowly. How much bread are we talking about? Between 60 and 80 loaves daily, plus whatever pastries and rolls you're able to produce. I'd pay standard wholesale rates, 4 cents per loaf for basic bread, more for specialty items. Payment on delivery, twice weekly. Her mind raced through the mathematics. 60 loaves at 4 cents each was $2.40 per day. 5 days a week, she'd need Sundays for rest and preparation, came to $12 a week, $48 a month, more than triple her current income. It was impossible. It was also exactly what she needed to not just survive, but actually thrive. That's a very generous offer, Evelyn said carefully. It's a fair offer for quality goods. I've tasted your bread, Mrs. Harper. It's the best I've had in 3 territories. You've had 1 roll that fell in the street. Half a roll. Sarah gave me the other half while you were cleaning up yesterday. Luke's mouth quirked. She's very generous. Said her papa taught her that sharing makes everything better. Despite herself, Evelyn felt her lips twitch toward a smile. That sounded exactly like something James would have said, and exactly like something Sarah would remember. I'd need to hire help, she said, thinking aloud. I couldn't produce that volume alone, and I'd need more equipment, another oven, at minimum, more mixing bowls, more baking pans, more storage. I'm prepared to advance you the capital for equipment and hiring, interest-free, to be repaid from contract proceeds over the first 6 months. Evelyn's brief flicker of hope guttered. So I'd be in debt to you. You'd be receiving a standard business loan. I'd have my lawyer draw up proper paperwork, everything legal and documented. If you want, you can have your own lawyer review the terms before you sign anything. I don't have a lawyer. Then I'll pay for you to retain one for the purpose of reviewing any documents I present to you. That way you can be certain everything is above board. Evelyn stared at him, trying to find the trap. Every instinct told her this was too good, too convenient, too perfectly designed to solve all her problems. Men like Luke Carter didn't hand out solutions to struggling widows unless those solutions somehow served their own interests. What's the catch? She asked bluntly. No catch, There's always a catch. Luke's expression softened into something that might have been sympathy. Mrs. Harper, Evelyn, I understand why you're suspicious. I do. But I need you to understand something. I'm not Marcus Rhodes. I don't operate by backing people into corners and watching them squirm. When I make an offer, it's genuine. When I give my word, I keep it. And when I tell you there's no catch, I mean it. Then why? The question burst from Evelyn like pressure from a kettle. Why me? Why this? You could contract with any bakery in 3 counties. You could even hire bakers to work at your ranch directly. Why go out of your way to help someone you barely know? Luke was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that suggested he was choosing his words with unusual care. 5 years ago, I was running a small ranch in Colorado. Built it from nothing, same as your husband built this bakery. Worked myself near to death, but it was mine, and I was proud of it. His gaze drifted toward the window, though Evelyn suspected he was seeing something far beyond Redstone Crossing's dusty street. Then a banker named William Thorne decided he wanted my land, offered me a fraction of what it was worth. When I refused, he called in a loan I'd forgotten I'd signed. Nothing major, just $50 I'd borrowed for seed money when I was first starting out. Evelyn felt her stomach tighten. She knew how this story ended. Thorne bought up my debt from the original lender, tripled the interest, and demanded immediate payment. When I couldn't produce the full amount, he foreclosed. Took everything, land, cattle, equipment, the house I'd built with my own hands. It was all legal, all perfectly within his rights. Luke's jaw tightened. He didn't even want the ranch for himself. He just wanted to prove he could take it. What did you do? I lost everything. Spent the next 2 years working for wages, saving every penny, learning everything I could about how men like Thorne operate. Then I went into the cattle business, got lucky with a few drives, made smart investments, built up capital. His attention returned to Evelyn, intense and direct. And I promised myself that if I ever had the power to stop men like Thorne, like Rhodes, from destroying people the way I was destroyed, I'd use it. The story explained everything and nothing. It made Luke's intervention logical, even noble. It also made Evelyn acutely aware that she was dealing with a man who understood loss, who'd been shaped by it, who might be acting from motives more complex than simple altruism. I'm sorry that happened to you, she said quietly. Don't be sorry, be smart. Luke's tone sharpened slightly. Rhodes is going to come at you, Evelyn. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but he's going to make a move. And when he does, I want you to have the resources to fight back. And if I don't want to fight, if I just want to run my bakery and raise my daughter in peace, then Rhodes will take your bakery anyway, and you won't have peace. Luke's bluntness was almost brutal. Men like him don't stop until they own everything or someone stops them. Those are your only 2 options. Evelyn wanted to argue, wanted to insist that he was being melodramatic, that surely Marcus Rhodes had bigger concerns than one widow's small business. But she couldn't, because deep down, she knew Luke was right. I need time to think about your offer, she said finally. Of course. Take whatever time you need. Luke moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I meant what I said yesterday. I do admire your spirit, and I think, given the right support, you could build something remarkable here. He was gone before Evelyn could formulate a response, leaving her alone with the smell of fresh bread, a bouquet of wildflowers, and a decision that felt far too important for someone operating on 2 hours of sleep. Sarah reappeared, fully dressed and ready for the day. Is he gone? Yes. He's nice. Maybe. Mama, why do you always think nice people aren't really nice? The question, delivered with childhood's devastating directness, hit Evelyn like a physical blow. Because Sarah was right. Somewhere in the last 3 years, Evelyn had stopped believing that kindness could exist without strings attached, that generosity might be genuine, that people might help simply because it was the right thing to do. Sometimes, sweetheart, people are nice because they want something. What does Mr. Carter want? To stop a bully, to honor a promise made in the aftermath of his own loss. To prove something to himself or to the world or to the ghost of a banker named William Thorne. Evelyn didn't know which answer was true, and she suspected Luke himself might not know either. I'm not sure yet, she admitted. The morning rush, such as it was, came and went. Evelyn served her handful of regular customers, accepted their carefully neutral greetings, and pretended not to notice the way they glanced at the wildflowers on her counter or the way their eyes lingered with questions they were too polite to ask directly. By noon, the flowers had become the subject of intense speculation. Mrs. Chen from the general store made a pointed comment about unexpected admirers. Old Tom Barrett, who ran the livery stable, mentioned that he'd seen Luke Carter riding past the bakery 3 times in the last week. Even quiet Margaret Sullivan, who rarely spoke to anyone, paused on her way out to observe that the wildflowers were very romantic. Evelyn bore it all with gritted teeth and forced smiles, all while her mind churned through Luke's offer from every conceivable angle. The financial benefit was undeniable. The risk, however, was equally clear. If she accepted Luke's contract and his loan, she'd be tying her fate to his. When, not if, but when, Luke and Marcus Rhodes came into direct conflict, Evelyn would be caught in the middle. Her small bakery would become another battlefield in whatever war was brewing between them. But what was the alternative? Continue struggling on the margins, hoping Rhodes would grow bored of watching her slowly starve. Wait for her luck to run out, for an unexpected expense to tip her into default, for the inevitable moment when the bank came calling. She was still debating with herself when the afternoon mail arrived, delivered by young Tommy Cooper, who blushed scarlet whenever Sarah so much as looked at him. "Afternoon, Mrs. Harper. Got a letter for you?" Evelyn took the envelope with growing trepidation. Twice in 2 days felt less like coincidence and more like the universe conspiring against her peace of mind. This envelope was different from yesterday's official document. Smaller, personal stationery, sealed with wax that bore an ornate R. Rhodes. Evelyn waited until Tommy had departed before opening it. The note inside was written in Isabella Rhodes's distinctive flowing script. "Dear Mrs. Harper, I hope this letter finds you well. I wanted to personally invite you to tea tomorrow afternoon at 3 o'clock at the Rhodes residence. I've heard so much about your remarkable bakery and would love to discuss a potential business opportunity. I do hope you'll accept. I so rarely get to spend time with other women of enterprise and determination. Warmest regards, Isabella Rhodes." Evelyn read the note 3 times, her unease growing with each pass. Isabella had never expressed the slightest interest in the bakery before. She'd walked past it hundreds of times without so much as a glance, and women of enterprise and determination? Isabella Rhodes viewed women who worked for a living with the same disdain she might reserve for particularly stubborn stains on expensive fabric. This wasn't an invitation. It was a summons, and they both knew Evelyn couldn't afford to refuse. The Rhodes residence occupied the most prominent hill overlooking Redstone Crossing, a 3-story monument to wealth and taste that seemed designed specifically to remind the townspeople of their place in the social hierarchy. Evelyn had never been inside, had never been invited, had never wanted to be. She spent most of the next day preparing for the meeting with the same grim determination she'd once used to prepare James's body for burial. She wore her best dress, a simple gray cotton that had seen better days but was still respectable. She arranged her hair with care. She practiced polite refusals in the mirror until Sarah asked if she was feeling well. At precisely 3 o'clock, Evelyn stood at the imposing front door of the Rhodes mansion, her heart hammering and her spine rigid with determination not to show fear. The door opened to reveal a stern-faced housekeeper who looked Evelyn up and down with barely concealed disdain before gesturing her inside. The entrance hall was everything Evelyn had imagined and worse. Crystal chandeliers, imported carpets, artwork that probably cost more than her entire bakery. It was beautiful. It was also designed to intimidate, and Evelyn hated that it was working. "Mrs. Harper, how delightful that you could join me." Isabella Rhodes descended the grand staircase like she was posing for a portrait, every movement calculated for maximum effect. She wore a dress of deep emerald silk that probably required 3 people to properly lace. Her dark hair was arranged in an elaborate style that had definitely required professional help. She was, objectively, beautiful, and she knew it. "Miss Rhodes, thank you for the invitation. Please call me Isabella, and may I call you Evelyn? I feel we should be on friendly terms, given what I hope will be a mutually beneficial arrangement." Evelyn followed Isabella into a sitting room that managed to be both ostentatiously decorated and oddly cold. Everything looked expensive and uncomfortable, chosen more for display than use. Tea? Isabella gestured to an elaborate service already laid out. Thank you. They went through the ritual of pouring and serving, both pretending this was a normal social call between peers rather than what it actually was, a negotiation between predator and prey. I'll be direct, Evelyn. Isabella set down her teacup with a delicate clink. I'm aware that your financial situation has become complicated recently. I'm managing. Are you? Isabella's smile didn't reach her eyes. Because, from where I sit, it appears you've attracted the attention of a very influential man. Luke Carter, I believe? There it was. Evelyn forced herself to sip her tea calmly. Mr. Carter is my landlord. Oh, he's much more than that from what I hear. Reduced rent, business proposals, personal visits. Isabella leaned forward conspiratorially. The whole town is talking about it, you know. Luke Carter and the widow Harper. It's quite the romance. There's no romance. Isn't there? Isabella's eyes glittered with something sharp and dangerous. That's not how it looks to those of us paying attention. And I always pay attention, Evelyn. It's how I've stayed ahead in this town. Evelyn set down her own teacup, her patience wearing thin. What do you want, Isabella? Want? I want to help you, of course. Isabella's expression transformed into something approximating concern, the way a cat might look concerned about a mouse. You're in over your head with Luke Carter. He's playing a game you don't understand, and you're going to get hurt. And you're telling me this out of the goodness of your heart. I'm telling you this because I know what it's like to be used by ambitious men. Isabella's mask slipped slightly, revealing something that might have been genuine bitterness. Luke doesn't care about you or your bakery, Evelyn. He cares about undermining my father's position in this town. You're just a convenient tool. If that's true, it's my problem to deal with. Is it? Isabella's voice hardened. Because it seems to me that when Luke inevitably moves on to his next crusade, you'll be left with nothing. Except now you'll have made an enemy of my father by aligning yourself with his rival. That's not a position you want to be in. The threat wasn't even subtle. Evelyn felt anger kindle in her chest, hot and cleansing. So what are you proposing? That I reject Luke's help and throw myself on the mercy of the Rhodes family instead? I'm proposing that you sell me your lease. Isabella produced a folded document from somewhere in her elaborate dress. My father is prepared to offer you $500 for your business and your lease rights. That's more than enough to start fresh somewhere else, somewhere you won't be caught in the middle of a war between powerful men. Evelyn didn't even look at the document. No. You haven't heard my full offer. I don't need to. Evelyn stood, her tea untouched. My husband built that bakery with his own hands. He died believing I'd keep it running, and I'm not abandoning his legacy because you and your father want to play chess with Main Street. Isabella's facade cracked completely. You're making a mistake. Maybe, but it's my mistake to make. Luke Carter isn't your white knight, Evelyn. He's using you. And you're trying to buy me. Evelyn moved toward the door. At least Luke had the decency to make his manipulation look like generosity. If you walk out that door, my father will make your life very difficult. Evelyn turned back, and when she spoke, her voice was ice. Your father's been making my life difficult for 3 years. I'm still here. She walked out before Isabella could respond, her heart pounding but her steps steady. She'd just made an enemy of the most powerful family in Redstone Crossing. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt free. The feeling lasted until she rounded the corner and nearly collided with Luke Carter himself, who was standing on the street outside the Rhodes property with an expression that suggested he'd been waiting for her. Evelyn? His eyes scanned her face, noting something she suspected she couldn't hide. What happened? I just turned down $500 to sell my business and leave town. Luke's expression darkened. Isabella? And her father, presumably. Evelyn started walking, needing movement to burn off the adrenaline still coursing through her system. You were right. They're coming at me. I'm sorry. Don't be. Evelyn stopped, turned to face him directly. I'm accepting your contract. All of it. The bread supply, the equipment loan, the whole arrangement. Whatever paperwork you need me to sign, Have your lawyer draw it up." Luke studied her carefully. "You're sure?" "I'm sure that I'm tired of being afraid. I'm sure that I'm tired of letting people like the Rhodes family dictate my choices. And I'm sure that if I'm going to make enemies anyway, I might as well do it while building something worth fighting for." She met his gaze steadily. "Is your offer still open?" "Always." "Then let's do this properly. Business partners, everything documented and legal and above board. Can you live with that?" Something that looked like respect flickered across Luke's face. "I can live with that." They shook hands there on the street corner while the afternoon sun painted Redstone Crossing in shades of amber and gold. It should have felt like a victory. Instead, it felt like the moment before a storm broke, that strange electric pause when the air goes still and you know with absolute certainty that everything's about to change. Evelyn had no idea how right she was. The storm came faster than Evelyn anticipated. Within a week of signing Luke's contract, her world transformed in ways both exhilarating and terrifying. The new oven arrived on a Tuesday, massive and gleaming, carried by 4 sweating ranch hands who installed it with the kind of precision that suggested Luke had given very specific instructions. By Thursday, Evelyn had hired Mary Chen, the general store owner's widowed sister, who turned out to have a gift for pastry that made Evelyn's own skills look pedestrian. By Saturday, they were producing 70 loaves a day, and the smell of fresh bread filled Main Street from dawn until dusk. The bakery thrived, and Marcus Rhodes watched. Evelyn felt his attention like a weight, saw it in the way he slowed when passing her shop, in the calculating looks Isabella shot through the window, in the subtle changes around town. Customers who'd started returning after the news of her contract with Luke suddenly found themselves offered special terms at the Rhodes Bank if they'd consider shopping elsewhere. Suppliers who'd been happy to extend her credit were now demanding payment up front, citing policy changes that Evelyn knew originated from exactly one source. But she had Luke's backing now, and that made all the difference. When the flour supplier tried to double her prices, Luke's lawyer appeared with documentation of price fixing. When the delivery company refused to transport her goods, Luke sent his own wagons. Every move Rhodes made was met with a counter-move, and Evelyn found herself in the middle of a chess game played with money and influence she could barely comprehend. Sarah noticed the change in their circumstances with a child's uncomplicated joy. Better meals, new shoes that actually fit, bedtime stories that didn't end early because Evelyn was too exhausted to finish them. But she also noticed the tension that crept into Evelyn's shoulders whenever someone mentioned the Rhodes family, the way her mother's smile grew tight when discussing business matters. "Mama," Sarah asked one evening as Evelyn tucked her into bed, "are the bad people going to take our bakery?" The question froze Evelyn's hand mid-motion. "What bad people, sweetheart?" "The ones you and Mr. Luke are fighting." Sarah's blue eyes were far too knowing for 6 years old. "Mary says they're mean and want to hurt us." Evelyn made a mental note to speak with Mary about discretion around children. "Mary shouldn't have said that." "But is it true?" Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed, choosing her words carefully. "There are people who want things we have. That doesn't make them bad necessarily. Papa used to say that taking things that don't belong to you is wrong, and our bakery doesn't belong to them." The simple moral clarity of childhood. Evelyn felt her throat tighten. "No, baby, it doesn't. Then we have to fight them. It's not that simple." "Why not?" Sarah sat up, her expression fierce in a way that reminded Evelyn painfully of James. "Papa said you were the bravest person he knew. He said you could do anything." Evelyn pulled her daughter close, breathing in the scent of soap and childhood innocence. "Your papa saw the best in everyone. Sometimes I think he saw things in me that weren't really there." "They're there," Sarah insisted. "I see them too." The faith in her daughter's voice nearly broke Evelyn. She kissed Sarah's forehead and tucked her back under the covers, then retreated downstairs before the tears could fall. Luke was waiting in the bakery, reviewing the week's accounts with the focused intensity he brought to everything. He'd made a habit of stopping by after hours, ostensibly to discuss business, but increasingly to simply be present. Evelyn had stopped questioning it, stopped analyzing his motives. The truth was, she'd come to depend on these quiet evenings, on the steady competence he brought to problems that would have overwhelmed her alone. "Production's up 30%, Luke said without preamble. Quality's consistent. Mary's working out well. She's extraordinary. Evelyn began wiping down the already clean counter, needing something to do with her hands. I don't know how I managed without her. You managed because you're stubborn and brilliant. Luke set down the ledger. But you're also running yourself ragged. When was the last time you slept more than 4 hours? I sleep fine. Evelyn, the gentle reproach in his voice made her stop, turn to face him. I'm managing. You're exhausted, and you don't have to be. Luke stood, moving closer but maintaining the careful distance he always kept. I could hire another assistant, someone to handle the morning prep so you're not starting at 4 a.m. every day. I don't need charity. It's not charity. It's practical business management. You can't run this operation on willpower alone. I've been running on willpower for 3 years, and it's killing you. The bluntness of it made Evelyn flinch. Luke's expression softened. I'm not criticizing. I'm worried. There's a difference. Evelyn wanted to argue, to insist she was fine, to maintain the armor of self-sufficiency she'd built so carefully. But she was tired, bone-deep, soul-tired in ways that sleep couldn't fix. And Luke's concern, genuine and uncomplicated, threatened to undo her completely. Why do you care so much? The question came out quieter than she intended. Luke was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that suggested he'd been holding this answer for a while. Because when I look at you, I see someone fighting the same battle I fought 5 years ago. And I remember how desperately I wished someone would step in, would offer help, would see me as more than just another casualty of men like William Thorne. He met her gaze steadily. I can't change what happened to me, but I can make sure it doesn't happen to you. That's not the only reason. No, Luke admitted, it's not. The air between them shifted, charged with something neither of them seemed willing to name. Evelyn felt her pulse quicken, felt the pull of possibilities she'd forbidden herself to consider. Luke! The crash of breaking glass cut her off. Both of them spun toward the window, where a rock now lay among the shattered fragments, wrapped in paper that Evelyn already knew would carry a message she didn't want to read. Luke reached it first, his expression darkening as he unfolded the note. His jaw clenched, a muscle twitching in his cheek. What does it say? Evelyn asked, though part of her didn't want to know. Luke handed her the paper without a word. The message was brief, written in block letters that suggested someone had tried to disguise their handwriting. Whores who spread for rich men get what they deserve. Leave while you still can. The crudeness of it hit Evelyn like a physical blow. She felt her face burn with humiliation and rage, felt her hands start to shake. Evelyn, Luke reached for her, but she jerked away. Don't! Her voice came out strangled. Just don't! This is exactly what they want. They want you scared, want you ashamed, want you to run. Well, it's working. Evelyn crumpled the note, threw it toward the trash with more force than necessary. Everyone in town is going to be talking about this by morning. Everyone's going to believe. Anyone who knows you won't believe a word of it. You don't understand what it's like. Evelyn rounded on him, her control fracturing. You're a man. A wealthy, powerful man. People whisper about your business dealings, maybe, or your political connections. But they don't question your morality. They don't call you vile names or suggest you're trading your body for favors. You're right, Luke said quietly. I don't understand that, but I understand cruelty meant to break you, and I understand that the people behind this are counting on you to crumble. Maybe I should. The words felt like surrender. Maybe I should sell, take whatever money I can get and leave. Start over somewhere else, somewhere the Rhodes family doesn't control everything. Is that what you want? I want my daughter to grow up without rocks being thrown through her mother's window. Evelyn's voice cracked. I want to run a bakery without it turning into a war zone. I want... She couldn't finish. The wants were too big, too impossible. She wanted James back, wanted these 3 years of struggle to disappear, wanted the simple life she'd been promised before everything fell apart. Luke crossed to her in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms before she could protest. Evelyn stiffened, started to push away, then collapsed against his chest as 3 years of carefully controlled tears finally broke free. She sobbed into his shirt, great shuddering gasps that shook her entire frame, while Luke held her steady and said nothing. When the storm finally passed, Evelyn pulled back, mortified by her loss of control. "I'm sorry." "Don't apologize for being human." Luke's hands remained on her shoulders, warm and steady. "You're allowed to break down. You're allowed to be scared." "I can't afford to be scared." "Everyone's scared, Evelyn. The brave ones just don't let it stop them." She laughed, a watery sound that held no humor. "I don't feel brave." "You're the bravest person I know." The conviction in his voice made her look up, made her meet his eyes. What she saw there stole her breath. Not pity, not manipulation, but something that looked dangerously like admiration mixed with longing. "Luke!" She meant it as a warning, as a reminder of all the reasons this couldn't happen. He kissed her anyway. It was gentle, questioning, giving her every opportunity to pull away. Evelyn didn't pull away. Instead, she rose on her toes and kissed him back with 3 years of loneliness and longing and desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, she was allowed to want something for herself. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Evelyn felt the world tilt on its axis. Everything had just changed, and she had no idea if it was for better or worse. "I shouldn't have," Luke started. "Yes, you should have." Evelyn touched her fingers to his jaw, marveling at the tenderness in her own gesture. "I wanted you to. This complicates things." Things were already complicated. Luke caught her hand, pressed it against his chest where she could feel his heart hammering. "I need you to know this isn't about the bakery or the contract or making Rhodes angry. This is about you. Just you." "I know." And somehow, impossibly, she did. They stood there for a long moment, the broken window forgotten, the crude note irrelevant, the entire brewing conflict temporarily distant. Then reality reasserted itself in the form of footsteps on the stairs. They broke apart just as Sarah appeared, rubbing her eyes sleepily. "Mama? I heard a noise." "Just a broken window, sweetheart." Evelyn moved to intercept her daughter before she could see the glass. "Mr. Luke and I are taking care of it." Sarah's gaze moved between them with uncomfortable perception. "Are you crying, Mama?" "A little." "Is Mr. Luke making you cry?" "No, baby. The opposite, actually." Sarah seemed to accept this, her attention shifting to Luke with solemn assessment. "Papa used to make Mama stop crying, too. He was very good at it." The casual mention of James should have felt like betrayal, should have filled Evelyn with guilt. Instead, it felt like permission, like James himself was telling her it was acceptable to move forward, to let someone else share the burden. Luke knelt down, bringing himself eye level with Sarah once more. "Your papa sounds like he was a good man. The best." Sarah's conviction was absolute. "But he's gone now, and Mama needs someone to help her not be sad all the time." "Sarah," Evelyn's mortification was complete, but Luke just smiled, something genuine and warm. "I'd like to try, if that's all right with you." Sarah considered this with the gravity of a much older person. "Can you bake bread?" "Not as well as your mama." "Can you make her laugh?" "I'm working on it." "Can you protect us from the bad people?" The childish question held adult weight. Luke's expression grew serious. "Yes, I can do that." "I can do—" "Okay then." Sarah nodded decisively. "You can stay." She padded back upstairs, apparently satisfied with her interrogation, leaving Evelyn and Luke staring after her in stunned silence. "Did I just get vetted by a 6-year-old?" Luke asked finally. "And apparently passed." Evelyn felt laughter bubbling up, unexpected and cleansing. "She's very particular about who she allows into her life." "I'm honored." Luke stood, his expression growing serious again as he looked at the broken window. "But she's right about one thing. The bad people are escalating. A rock through the window tonight. Something worse tomorrow." "What do we do?" "We make sure they know you're not alone." Luke moved to the window, examining the damage. "I'm having men patrol this street every night, and I'm moving into the boarding house across the way." "You can't do that." "I can, and I am. Mrs. Fletcher has a room available, and it gives me a direct sight line to your shop." His tone brooked no argument. "I won't leave you vulnerable, Evelyn." She should have protested his protectiveness, should have insisted she could handle herself. But the truth was, she was terrified. The rock through the window had been crude, but it was also a promise of worse to come. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Don't thank me yet." Luke's jaw tightened. This is going to get worse before it gets better. Rhodes won't back down, and neither will I. You're caught in the middle of that. I chose to be in the middle of it when I signed your contract. You can still change your mind, I'd understand. Evelyn thought about it, really thought about it. She could walk away, could sell to the Rhodes family, could take Sarah and start over somewhere else. It would be easier, safer. It would also be surrender. I'm not leaving, she said firmly. This is my home, my business, my choice. Luke's smile was small but genuine. Then we fight. The next morning brought confirmation that the previous night's attack was just the opening salvo. Evelyn arrived downstairs to find a notice nailed to her door, an official-looking document bearing the seal of the town council. Her stomach dropped even before she read the contents. The notice cited various health and safety violations supposedly found during an inspection that Evelyn knew had never occurred. The bakery was being ordered to cease operations immediately pending a formal review. The signature at the bottom belonged to Martin Hayes, the council president and Marcus Rhodes's closest ally. Evelyn was still staring at the notice when Luke appeared, his face grim. "Let me guess," she said flatly. "Rhodes made a move." "Several, actually." Luke held up his own set of documents. "He's filed a complaint alleging you're in violation of your lease terms by running a wholesale operation from a retail-zoned property. He's also claiming that my contract with you constitutes unfair business practices designed to harm his banking interests. That's insane. That's legal maneuvering. None of it will hold up under scrutiny, but it doesn't have to. The goal is to tie us up in bureaucracy long enough to bleed you dry." Evelyn felt the familiar knot of anxiety tightening in her chest. "So what do we do?" "We fight it. I've already sent telegrams to the Territorial Governor's Office and the Commercial Affairs Board. My lawyers are preparing responses to every claim." Luke's expression hardened. "But in the meantime, we need to assume Rhodes will keep escalating." He was right. By noon, Evelyn had received 3 more official notices, one claiming unpaid taxes she knew she didn't owe, another demanding immediate repayment of a loan she'd never taken, and a third summoning her to a town council meeting that evening to address community concerns. "It's a trap," Mary said flatly when Evelyn showed her the summons. "They'll pack the meeting with Rhodes's people and make it look like the whole town is against you." "Then I won't give them the satisfaction." Evelyn crumpled the notice. "I won't go." "You have to go." Luke had appeared in the doorway so quietly neither of them had noticed. "If you don't show, they'll claim you're hiding, that you're guilty. You need to face them down." "I can't." "Yes, you can." Luke crossed to her, his presence steadying. "And you won't be alone. I'll be there. My lawyer will be there. And I guarantee half the town will be there to see what Rhodes is really up to." The meeting took place in the town hall, a converted warehouse that smelled of old wood and older grudges. By the time Evelyn arrived, with Luke on one side and his lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Catherine Mills, on the other, the room was packed with what looked like the entire population of Redstone Crossing. Marcus Rhodes sat at the council table like a king holding court, Isabella beside him wearing an expression of practiced sympathy that made Evelyn's skin crawl. Martin Hayes called the meeting to order with officious ceremony. "We're here tonight to address serious concerns regarding Harper's Bakery and its recent business practices," Hayes announced. "Mrs. Harper, you've been accused of multiple violations." "Alleged violations," Catherine Mills interrupted smoothly. "My client denies all claims and demands to see evidence of these supposed infractions." Hayes's jaw tightened. "The evidence speaks for itself." "Then present it." Catherine's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Documented evidence of these health violations, proof of unpaid taxes, records of this mysterious loan. If you have evidence, Councilman Hayes, now would be the time to produce it." The silence that followed was telling. Hayes glanced at Rhodes, who maintained his expression of concerned civic duty, but said nothing. "The investigations are ongoing," Hayes said finally. "Convenient." Catherine pulled out her own stack of documents. "Because my investigation found that every single claim made against Mrs. Harper can be traced back to sources with direct financial ties to the Rhodes Bank. Which suggests this isn't about violations at all. It's about eliminating business competition through abuse of civic authority." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Evelyn saw surprise on many faces, calculation on others. Rhodes's expression didn't change, but Isabella's eyes narrowed dangerously. "That's a serious accusation," Rhodes said, speaking for the first time. His voice was cultured, reasonable, utterly reasonable. "I understand that Mrs. Harper is under stress, and Mr. Carter has obviously encouraged her to see conspiracies where none exist. But the fact remains that legitimate concerns have been raised about a widow who's successfully growing her business." The voice came from the back of the room, and Evelyn turned to see Mrs. Chen standing, her weathered face set with determination. "I've been buying from Harper's Bakery for 3 years, never once seen anything that looked like a health violation. Never once seen Evelyn Harper do anything but work herself half to death trying to keep her husband's dream alive." "Hear, hear!" Old Tom Barrett rose, his voice carrying despite his age. "This town's seen enough of powerful folks crushing decent people. Maybe it's time we stood up for one of our own." More voices joined in, a chorus of support that seemed to catch Rhodes off guard. Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes as people she barely knew spoke up in her defense. The livery owner, the schoolteacher, Margaret Sullivan, who never spoke to anyone. Rhodes let them talk, his expression growing colder with each testimony. When the voices finally quieted, he stood, commanding attention without raising his voice. "I appreciate everyone's passion," he said smoothly. "But passion doesn't change facts. Mrs. Harper has accepted substantial financial support from Mr. Carter, a relative newcomer to our community. This raises questions about undue influence, about business practices that may not be in the town's best interest." He paused, letting the implication sink in. "I'm simply asking that we investigate these matters thoroughly before allowing this situation to damage Redstone Crossing's reputation." "The only thing damaging Redstone Crossing's reputation is this witch hunt." Luke stood, and the room went silent. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried absolute authority. "I've spent the last 2 months learning about this town, Councilman Rhodes. And what I've learned is that you hold mortgages on 63% of Main Street properties, that you've foreclosed on 11 businesses in the last 3 years, that you've systematically consolidated power while driving out anyone who might challenge your control. Those are business matters. Those are facts. And here's another one. I'm prepared to offer lease buyouts to every business owner currently under Rhodes Bank mortgages. Fair market value, reasonable terms, no strings attached." Luke's gaze swept the room. "Because I don't believe in using debt as a weapon, and I don't believe in crushing people who are just trying to survive." The room erupted. Rhodes's face went purple with rage. Hayes banged his gavel uselessly. Isabella looked like she wanted to murder someone with her bare hands. And Evelyn realized, with crystalline clarity, that Luke had just declared war. The meeting dissolved into chaos. People crowded around Luke, asking questions about his offer. Others surrounded Evelyn, offering support and asking if she was all right. Catherine Mills stood beside Hayes, calmly discussing the legal implications of everything that had just happened while the councilman looked like he wanted to crawl under his desk. Through it all, Evelyn felt Marcus Rhodes's eyes on her. When she finally made herself meet his gaze, what she saw there made her blood run cold. This wasn't anger or wounded pride. This was calculation, the look of a man who'd just been backed into a corner and was deciding exactly how much damage he was willing to do on his way down. Isabella appeared beside her father, whispering something urgent. Rhodes nodded once, then stood and walked out without another word, his daughter following. "That wasn't good," Catherine said quietly, appearing at Evelyn's elbow. "You just won the battle, but Rhodes looked like a man planning to win the war." "Let him plan," Luke said, his hand finding Evelyn's. "We'll be ready." But 2 nights later, when the fire started, Evelyn realized they hadn't been ready at all. The smell of smoke woke her just after midnight. For a confused moment, Evelyn thought she'd left the ovens on, that she'd made some careless mistake. Then she heard the crackling and saw the orange glow beneath her door, and panic seized her completely. "Sarah!" She was across the room in seconds, grabbing her daughter from bed. Sarah woke with a cry of confusion that turned to fear as she saw the smoke beginning to seep under the door. "Mama, what's happening?" "Fire. We need to get out." Evelyn's mind raced through options. The door led to the stairs, which led to the bakery, which was clearly already burning. The window was their only chance. She ran to it, threw it open, looked down at the street 2 stories below, too far to jump with Sarah, but there was a ledge, and beyond that, the roof of the neighboring building. "Mrs. Harper!" The shout came from below. Luke stood in the street, surrounded by his ranch hands, already coordinating a response. "The fire escape! Use the fire escape!" What fire escape? Evelyn had never noticed, but then she saw it. A metal ladder bolted to the side of the building, probably installed by James years ago and forgotten. She grabbed Sarah, climbed through the window, and started down the ladder with her daughter clinging to her back like a terrified monkey. The heat was intense, the smoke choking. Sarah was crying, and Evelyn was crying, and the world had narrowed to each rung of the ladder, each desperate breath. Then Luke's hands were there, lifting Sarah away, helping Evelyn down the last few feet as the bakery's windows exploded outward in a shower of glass and flame. Luke pulled them both away from the building, shielding them with his body as debris rained down. Around them, townspeople had formed a bucket brigade, desperately trying to contain the blaze before it spread to neighboring structures. But Evelyn could see it was hopeless. The bakery was lost. Everything she'd worked for, everything James had built, 3 years of struggle and hope, gone. She watched it burn and felt something inside her break. Then she felt something else, a fury so pure and cold it drove out the grief. Because this wasn't an accident, this was murder, attempted and failed. Rhodes had tried to kill her and Sarah to protect his power and his pride. "Evelyn," Luke's voice cut through the roar of flames. "Look at me." She turned, saw her own rage reflected in his eyes. "He's going to pay for this," Luke said quietly. "I swear to you, Marcus Rhodes will pay for every bit of this." Evelyn looked at the burning bakery, at her terrified daughter, at the townspeople fighting to save what they could of her dream. Then she looked at Luke, and when she spoke, her voice was steady as stone. "No," she said. "We're both going to make him pay." The fire burned through the night, and by morning, Harper's Bakery existed only in memory and ash. Evelyn stood across the street as the sun rose, Sarah asleep in her arms, wrapped in a borrowed blanket from Mrs. Fletcher's boarding house. The building's skeleton stood like a blackened monument to everything she'd lost. The ovens James had saved for months to buy. The wooden counter he'd sanded smooth with his own hands. 3 years of sweat and hope reduced to charcoal and ruin. Luke stood beside her, his face grim in the early light. He hadn't left her side since pulling them from the fire escape, hadn't spoken except to give quiet orders to his men. Now, as the last embers died and the reality of the destruction became undeniable, he broke his silence. "The fire marshal will investigate," he said, "but we both know what he'll find." "Arson." Evelyn's voice was flat, emotionless. Somewhere in the long hours of watching her life burn, she'd moved past grief into something colder and more focused. Rhodes finally stopped playing games. "We can prove it. I have men who saw 2 figures running from the alley behind your building just before the fire started. Catherine's already drafting legal action." "Legal action takes time we don't have." Evelyn adjusted Sarah's weight in her arms, feeling her daughter's steady heartbeat against her chest. "Rhodes tried to kill us, Luke. He set fire to a building knowing we were inside, knowing a child was sleeping upstairs. Legal action isn't enough." Luke turned to face her fully, and something in his expression suggested he'd been waiting for this moment. "What are you proposing?" "I'm proposing we stop reacting and start acting. Rhodes has been controlling this town through fear and debt for years. Everyone knows it, but no one will stand against him because he holds all the power." Evelyn's gaze moved to the gathered townspeople, some of whom had fought the fire all night, others of whom had simply watched. "But he doesn't hold all the power anymore. You have resources. I have credibility as his victim. Together we have something he fears, the truth and the will to expose it. You want to go public, force him into the light. I want to destroy him the way he tried to destroy me." The words came out harder than Evelyn intended, but she didn't soften them. "I want everyone in this territory to know exactly what kind of man Marcus Rhodes is. I want his daughter to feel the same fear Sarah felt last night. I want them to lose everything, the way they've made others lose everything for years." Luke studied her face, and Evelyn wondered what he saw there. The widow who'd screamed at him in the street, or the woman who'd just survived a murder attempt and emerged ready for war. You understand what you're asking, Luke said quietly. Rhodes won't just roll over. He'll fight with everything he has. It could get dangerous. It's already dangerous. He burned down my home with my daughter inside. Evelyn's control cracked slightly, rage bleeding through. I'm done being afraid. I'm done playing by rules that only protect men like him. Whatever it takes, Luke, whatever it costs. Even if it costs us everything? The question hung between them, weighted with implications that went beyond business partnerships and legal battles. Evelyn thought about the kiss they'd shared 2 nights ago, about the way Sarah had accepted Luke into their fractured little family, about the future she'd started to imagine before the fire consumed it all. Especially if it costs us everything, she said. Because if we don't stop Rhodes now, there won't be anything left to lose. Luke nodded slowly, decision crystallizing in his expression. Then we do it right. No half measures, no mercy. We gather every piece of evidence, every witness, every scrap of documentation that proves what Rhodes has done, and then we bury him with it. How? Leave that to me. Luke glanced toward the ruins of the bakery. But first, you and Sarah need somewhere safe to stay. Mrs. Fletcher has rooms. We'll stay at the boarding house, Evelyn agreed. But Luke, I need to be part of this. Not just a victim to be protected. A partner. I know. He touched her face gently, a gesture that felt like both promise and apology. I wouldn't have it any other way. The investigation began within hours. Luke's resources proved vast and precisely deployed. Private investigators who arrived on the afternoon train, lawyers who descended like a well-dressed army, accountants who began meticulously combing through years of Rhodes Bank records. Catherine Mills coordinated it all with ruthless efficiency, transforming Mrs. Fletcher's parlor into a makeshift war room. Evelyn threw herself into the work with single-minded determination. While Sarah stayed with Mary Chen, who'd volunteered to care for her, Evelyn spent days going through documents, identifying patterns, connecting threads that had seemed random, but now formed a damning picture of systematic corruption. Look at this, she said on the third day, spreading papers across the table where Luke and Catherine were reviewing witness statements. Rhodes foreclosed on 11 properties in the last 3 years, but in every case, he called in the loans less than 30 days after the owners had made successful improvements or expansions. Catherine leaned forward, interest sharpening her features. He was waiting for them to invest their capital, then striking before they could recoup the costs. Exactly. And look who bought most of those properties. Evelyn tapped another document. Shell companies, all of them. But if you trace the ownership back far enough, they all lead to the same source, a holding company in Denver that's owned by Marcus Rhodes's brother-in-law. He's been asset stripping his own town. Luke's voice was cold with fury. Forcing people into debt, foreclosing, then buying the properties through proxies and reselling at a profit. It's brilliant, in a sociopathic way, Catherine said. Perfectly legal if you can't prove the shell companies are connected to Rhodes. Can we prove it? I think so. Evelyn pulled out another file, this one containing correspondence she'd obtained from Tom Barrett, who'd been foreclosed on 2 years prior. Tom saved everything, every letter, every notice, every contract, and buried in here is a receipt for a payment he made directly to Rhodes for consulting services. It's dated 2 weeks before the foreclosure. Catherine's eyes lit up. Rhodes was advising him on how to expand his business, then used that inside knowledge to time the foreclosure for maximum damage. That's fraud. That's Rhodes, Luke said grimly. The question is, can we get enough people to come forward? Tom's willing, but we need more than one victim. Leave that to me, Evelyn said. Over the next week, Evelyn did something she'd never done before. She stopped being invisible. She walked through Redstone Crossing with her head high, visiting every shop, every business, every person who'd ever been touched by Rhodes's manipulation. She didn't beg or cajole. She simply told her story, showed them the evidence, and asked if they'd been through something similar. The response was overwhelming. Mrs. Sullivan, the quiet woman from the dress shop, revealed that Rhodes had tripled her rent when she refused to sell him the building at half its value. The owner of the hardware store produced documents showing Rhodes had bought up all the local suppliers and forced him to pay premium prices or go out of business. Even Martin Hayes, the council president, came forward with shaking hands and a confession that Rhodes had been blackmailing him over a youthful indiscretion for years. Why are you telling me this? Evelyn asked Hayes as they sat in Catherine's makeshift office. Because I'm tired of being afraid, Hayes said simply. Because what he did to you and your daughter crossed a line even I can't ignore. And because if we don't stop him now, he'll own this entire town by year's end. By the end of the second week, Catherine had testimonies from 43 people and documentation of fraud spanning nearly a decade. She had proof of illegal foreclosures, predatory lending, price fixing, and intimidation. What she didn't have was evidence directly linking Rhodes to the fire. The men Luke's people saw running from the scene disappeared, Catherine explained during one of their evening strategy sessions. Without witnesses who can identify them, or physical evidence proving Rhodes paid them, we can't make an arson charge stick. Then we make the other charges stick, Luke said. We have enough to destroy his banking license, to bring criminal fraud charges, to ruin him financially and legally. It's not enough. Evelyn's voice was quiet but absolute. Rhodes tried to murder us. If we can't prove that, if we can't make him answer for that specifically, then we've failed. Evelyn, Luke started. No. She stood pacing the small room. You're both thinking like lawyers. You're thinking about what we can prove in court, but Rhodes isn't worried about court. He owns half the judges in the territory. What he's worried about is public opinion, is his reputation, is being exposed as the kind of monster who'd burn a child alive to protect his power. What are you suggesting? Catherine asked. Evelyn stopped pacing, an idea crystallizing with dangerous clarity. Isabella. Luke straightened. Isabella Rhodes? She was there at the mansion when her father planned this. She's been his partner in everything, the manipulation, the foreclosures, the intimidation, but she's also the weak link. Evelyn thought back to their tea, to the bitterness she'd glimpsed beneath Isabella's polished surface. She resents him, resents being used, resents being seen as just an extension of her father's ambitions, and she's terrified of losing her position in society. You want to turn her against him, Catherine said slowly. I want to give her a choice. Help us, and she gets immunity. She gets to rebuild her life, maybe even her reputation, as the daughter who exposed her father's crimes. Or stay loyal and go down with him when we destroy the Rhodes empire anyway. Luke shook his head. She'll never betray her father. Family loyalty isn't as strong as self-preservation. Evelyn met his gaze steadily. Trust me on this. I know what it's like to have your entire world threatened, to face losing everything. Isabella will choose herself. She always does. Catherine considered this. It's risky. If she refuses and warns Rhodes, we lose the element of surprise. Then we make the offer in a way she can't refuse. Evelyn's mind was already working through the approach. We show her everything we have. We make it clear that we're moving forward with or without her cooperation, and we give her 48 hours to decide which side of history she wants to be on. Luke and Catherine exchanged glances. Finally, Luke nodded. Do it. But I'm coming with you. No. Evelyn's response was immediate. She won't talk if you're there. This needs to be woman to woman, victim to accomplice. Let me handle Isabella. The next afternoon, Evelyn stood once again at the imposing door of the Rhodes mansion. This time, she didn't wait for an invitation. She simply knocked, and when the same disdainful housekeeper appeared, pushed past her into the entrance hall. Mrs. Harper, you can't just... The woman sputtered. Tell Miss Rhodes I'm here. Tell her I have information about the fire. And tell her that if she doesn't see me in the next 5 minutes, I'm taking what I know directly to the territorial marshal. Isabella appeared at the top of the staircase within 3 minutes, her expression a careful mask of surprise and disdain. But Evelyn caught the flicker of fear in her eyes, the slight tremor in her hands as she gripped the banister. Evelyn, how unexpected. I heard about your terrible tragedy. Did you? Evelyn's voice was ice. Funny, because I heard you were there when your father planned it. Isabella's mask slipped. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. Evelyn ascended the stairs, forcing Isabella to either retreat or stand her ground. Isabella stood, but barely. You know exactly what I'm talking about. The fire wasn't an accident. It was attempted murder. And you knew about it. That's a serious accusation with no proof. I have 43 sworn testimonies about your father's criminal activities. I have documentation of fraud, extortion, and conspiracy. I have enough evidence to put Marcus Rhodes in prison for the rest of his life. Evelyn stopped one step below Isabella, forcing her to look down. What I don't have yet is proof he ordered the fire, but I don't need it, because you're going to give it to me. Isabella laughed, a brittle sound. Why would I do that? Because I'm offering you something your father never has. A choice. Evelyn pulled a folded document from her pocket. This is an immunity agreement. You tell us everything you know about your father's activities, including the fire, and you walk away. Clean record, fresh start, maybe even some public sympathy as the brave daughter who exposed corruption. Or you go down with him. When we present our evidence, the whole territory will know what the Rhodes family has done to this town. You'll be just as hated as your father, just as unemployable, just as ruined. And unlike him, you're young enough to spend decades living with the consequences. Isabella's face had gone pale. You're bluffing. Am I? Evelyn handed her the document. Read it. Take 48 hours to decide. But understand this, Isabella. I survived your father's attempt to kill me and my daughter. I'm not bluffing about anything anymore. She turned and descended the stairs, her heart pounding but her steps steady. She'd reached the front door when Isabella's voice stopped her. Wait. Evelyn turned. Isabella stood at the top of the stairs, the document clutched in her hands, her careful composure completely shattered. If I do this, Isabella said quietly, if I help you, will you promise he can't hurt me? The vulnerability in the question was startling. For the first time, Evelyn saw past the polished society mask to the frightened woman beneath, someone who'd spent her life as a pawn in her father's games and was finally realizing she didn't have to be. I promise, Evelyn said. You help us stop him, and you get to build a life that's yours, not his, yours. Isabella stared at her for a long moment. Then she nodded, once, a decision made. Come back tomorrow. Bring your lawyer, and I'll tell you everything. Evelyn left the mansion with her hands shaking and her mind racing. She'd done it. She'd turned Isabella Rhodes, had cracked open the last door between them and the evidence they needed to destroy Marcus Rhodes completely. The victory felt hollow, because what came next would be war, real and brutal and potentially deadly. She was halfway back to the boarding house when the attack came. Two men emerged from an alley, moving with purpose. Evelyn had time to register their approach, to start running, before rough hands grabbed her arms. She screamed, fought, kicked backward, and connected with something solid. One man cursed, his grip loosening. She wrenched free, started running, and ran straight into a third man who'd been waiting around the corner. Mrs. Harper, he said, his voice cultured and familiar. We need to talk. Marcus Rhodes stepped from the shadows, flanked by two more men. Evelyn was surrounded, trapped in broad daylight on a street that suddenly seemed impossibly empty. Let me go, she demanded, forcing steel into her voice despite the fear clawing at her throat. In a moment. First, I want you to understand something. Rhodes approached slowly, his expression calm, almost pleasant. You've been very busy these past 2 weeks, gathering evidence, speaking with my business associates, turning them against me with lies and distortions. They're not lies. Perspective, Mrs. Harper. One person's aggressive business practice is another person's fraud, depending on who's telling the story. Rhodes stopped just beyond arm's reach. But here's what you need to understand. You're not going to win this fight. You're going to drop your investigation, dismiss your lawyers, and leave Redstone Crossing permanently. Or what? You'll burn down another building? Try to kill another child? Rhodes's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. I don't know what you're talking about. That fire was a terrible accident. The fire marshal's report will confirm that. We both know that you're a grieving widow who's been taken advantage of by an outsider with his own agenda. Rhodes's voice hardened. Luke Carter isn't your savior, Mrs. Harper. He's using you to get at me, and when he's done, he'll discard you just like he's discarded every other temporary convenience in his life. That's not true, isn't it? Ask yourself why a wealthy rancher would take such an interest in a struggling baker. Ask yourself what he really wants. Rhodes leaned closer, his voice dropping. But ask quickly. Because if you persist with this ridiculous crusade, I will destroy everything you care about. Your daughter will grow up without a mother. Your friends will suffer for their association with you. And Luke Carter will learn that in this territory, I still hold all the power. Before Evelyn could respond, one of the men grabbed her arm again, squeezing hard enough to bruise. Mr. Rhodes says you should leave town, Mrs. Harper. You should listen. Let her go. The voice came from behind Rhodes, cold and lethal. Luke stood at the alley entrance, flanked by 6 of his ranch hands. Each man was armed, their hands resting casually on their gun belts in a way that left no doubt they knew how to use them. Rhodes turned slowly, his expression shifting to mild surprise. Mr. Carter, what an unexpected coincidence. Release her, now. We were just having a conversation. You were threatening a woman in broad daylight with hired thugs. Luke's hand moved to his own weapon. That's not a conversation. That's assault. So I'll ask one more time. Release her, or my men will make you. The tension stretched taut as a wire. Evelyn felt the man's grip loosen slightly as he calculated odds and found them wanting. Then Rhodes made a small gesture and she was released. This isn't over, Rhodes said quietly. No, Luke agreed. It's not. But the next time you threaten her, you won't see me coming. Rhodes and his men retreated, disappearing into the afternoon crowds. The moment they were gone, Evelyn's legs nearly gave out. Luke caught her, held her steady. Are you hurt? No, just scared. She looked up at him. How did you know? I've had men watching you since the fire. Did you really think I'd let you walk around unprotected after Rhodes tried to kill you once? Luke's expression was grim. What happened at the mansion? Isabella's going to talk. Tomorrow, with Catherine present, she's going to tell us everything. Luke exhaled slowly. Then we need to move fast. Rhodes knows he's losing control. That makes him desperate, and desperate men do terrible things. He was right. That night, they moved Evelyn and Sarah to Luke's ranch, where armed guards patrolled and safety was more than an illusion. They moved Catherine's entire operation there, too, transforming the ranch house into a fortress. And the next day, Isabella Rhodes arrived in a plain wagon, wearing a simple dress instead of her usual finery, looking more like a frightened girl than a society queen. She sat in Luke's study for 6 hours, Catherine taking notes, and told them everything. She told them about her father's schemes going back 15 years, about the shell companies and fraudulent foreclosures. She told them about the blackmail, the intimidation, the systematic destruction of anyone who threatened his power. And finally, with tears streaming down her face, she told them about the night before the fire. He was in his study, Isabella said, her voice barely above a whisper. Drinking brandy and planning. He said the legal approach wasn't working, that you had too many allies now. He said the only way to break Luke's support was to remove you entirely. She looked at Evelyn with something that might have been genuine remorse. He ordered 2 men to burn the bakery. They were supposed to make it look like an accident. They were supposed to wait until you'd closed, until they were sure the building was empty. But they didn't wait, Evelyn said flatly. They said the timing was right. They said, Isabella's voice broke. They said it didn't matter anyway, that a widow and child were acceptable losses. The room went silent. Catherine's pen had stopped moving. Luke's expression was carved from stone, and Evelyn felt something inside her crystallize into diamond-hard certainty. I want his confession on record, she said. I want everyone to know exactly what kind of monster he is. I can testify in court, Isabella offered. No. An idea was forming, dangerous and possibly insane, but perfect. We need more than testimony. We need proof even he can't deny. Luke met her eyes, understanding dawning. You want to make him confess. I want to trap him. Evelyn turned to Isabella. Can you get him to meet with you somewhere we can record the conversation? Recording a private conversation is illegal in most jurisdictions, Catherine warned. But testimony about what you witnessed someone say isn't, Luke countered. If Isabella wears a wire, if we have witnesses who hear Rhodes confess directly, it's still risky, Catherine said. If Rhodes realizes it's a trap, he won't. Isabella straightened, something like determination replacing the fear in her expression. He thinks I'm weak. He thinks I'll always choose him over anything else. I can use that. Over the next 3 days, they planned with military precision. Isabella would request a meeting with her father under the guise of warning him about the investigation, would lead the conversation toward the fire, would get him to confirm the details Isabella had already provided. Luke's men would position themselves throughout the building, ready to intervene if things went wrong. And Evelyn would wait, listening through a door, finally hearing the man who'd tried to kill her admit his crimes in his own words. The meeting took place in Rhodes' bank office, the same oak-paneled room where he'd orchestrated a decade of destruction. Isabella wore the wire hidden in her elaborate hairstyle, a tiny device that transmitted to receivers Luke had positioned in the adjacent rooms. Evelyn crouched beside Luke, Catherine, and 2 territorial marshals who'd been read into the operation, listening as Isabella greeted her father. "Papa, we need to talk." "Isabella, darling, this is unexpected." Rhodes sounded pleased, unsuspecting. "What brings you here?" "I'm worried about the investigation, about what they might find." "Let me worry about that. I have everything under control." "Do you?" Isabella's voice carried just the right note of concern. "Because they have testimonies, Papa, dozens of them. And they're saying terrible things about you, about us. Lies, all of it. We've done nothing wrong." "What about the foreclosures? What about the properties you took through those shell companies?" A pause. Then Rhodes's voice, harder now. "That's legitimate business. How did you— I'm your daughter. Did you think I didn't notice?" Isabella's performance was perfect, threading the line between accusation and familial concern. "But Papa, they're also asking about the fire, the one at Harper's Bakery." Another pause, longer this time. When Rhodes spoke, his voice had gone cold. "What about it?" "They're saying it wasn't an accident. They're saying you ordered it." "That's absurd." "Is it?" Isabella pressed. "Because I remember that night. I remember you in your study, furious about the widow and Luke Carter. I remember you making phone calls, giving orders. You remember incorrectly." "Papa, please. I'm trying to help you. But if they have proof, if someone talks, no one will talk." Rhodes's certainty was absolute. "The men I hired aren't the talking type. And even if they were, they can't prove I ordered anything. It's my word against accusations from a grief-stricken widow and an opportunistic rancher." "But I heard you," Isabella said softly. "The night before the fire. You told those men to burn it down. You said—" her voice caught convincingly. "You said it didn't matter if anyone was inside." The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. Evelyn held her breath, willing Rhodes to respond, to confirm, to damn himself with his own words. "You're my daughter," Rhodes said finally. "You understand why it had to be done. Carter was using that woman to undermine everything we've built. The bakery was a symbol, a rallying point. By removing it, I removed Carter's leverage. It was strategic. But there was a child inside. Collateral damage." Rhodes's voice held no remorse, no hesitation. "In war, there are always casualties. The Harper woman chose her side when she aligned with Carter. Whatever happened to her and her daughter is a consequence of that choice." Evelyn sat clenched into fists. Beside her, Luke's expression was murderous. But Catherine was nodding, satisfaction in her eyes. They had him. "Papa, Isabella's voice wavered. "I don't know if I can live with that." "You can, and you will." Rhodes's tone shifted to command. "You're a Rhodes, Isabella. We do what's necessary to protect our interests. We don't apologize, and we don't have regrets. The Harper woman survived. Consider it mercy." "And if they prove you did it?" "They can't. Not without a confession, and I'm not fool enough to provide one." A pause. "Why are you asking these questions, Isabella? Who have you been talking to?" "No one, I just—" The door burst open. The marshals moved in, badges displayed, weapons drawn. Rhodes spun, his expression cycling through shock, fury, and finally calculation. "Marcus Rhodes," the lead marshal announced, "you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit arson, attempted murder, fraud, and about 15 other charges my colleague has written down somewhere. You have the right to—" "This is entrapment," Rhodes snarled. "This is justice," Evelyn said, stepping into the room. Rhodes's gaze snapped to her, and the hatred there was almost palpable. You tried to kill me and my daughter. You destroyed my home. You terrorized this entire town. And now everyone's going to know exactly what kind of man you are. You think you've won? Rhodes's laugh was ugly. You think arresting me changes anything? I own half the judges in this territory. I'll be out by morning, and then you'll face federal charges, Catherine interrupted smoothly, entering behind Evelyn. Because as of this morning, I've forwarded all our evidence to the territorial governor and the federal prosecutor in Denver. Your local connections won't save you from those investigations. Rhodes's face went purple. He lunged toward Isabella, who'd shrunk against the wall. You betrayed me! Luke blocked his path, his presence a wall Rhodes couldn't cross. Touch her, and it'll be the last thing you do. The marshals hauled Rhodes back, cuffing his hands with practiced efficiency. As they led him toward the door, he turned one last time to Evelyn. This isn't over, he spat. You've made an enemy today that will haunt you for the rest of your life. No, Evelyn said quietly. Today, I ended the nightmare that's haunted this town for years. The rest of my life starts now. They took Rhodes away, his protests echoing down the hall until distance and doors muffled them into silence. Isabella collapsed into a chair, shaking. Evelyn found, to her surprise, that she felt something like pity for the woman. You did the right thing, she said. Did I? Isabella looked up, mascara running down her face. I just destroyed my own father. You stopped a monster, Luke corrected gently. There's a difference. The aftermath unfolded with surprising speed. Rhodes's arrest made headlines across 3 territories. The evidence Catherine had compiled triggered investigations that uncovered corruption far beyond Redstone Crossing. Within 2 weeks, 4 judges had resigned, a dozen business associates had been charged with related crimes, and the Rhodes Bank had been seized by territorial authorities pending a full audit. The town transformed almost overnight. Businesses that had struggled under Rhodes's thumb suddenly thrived. People walked straighter, spoke louder, smiled more freely. It was as if Redstone Crossing had been holding its breath for years and could finally exhale. Isabella disappeared after giving her testimony, headed east to family who'd promised her a fresh start. She left Evelyn a letter, simple and brief, that ended with, "Thank you for giving me a choice. I hope someday I'll be brave enough to deserve it." And Evelyn, standing in the ruins of her burned bakery, finally allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they'd actually won. "What are you thinking?" Luke asked, coming to stand beside her. "I'm thinking that this is where it started, where I screamed at a stranger and set everything in motion." She looked at the blackened timbers, the destroyed ovens, the ash that had once been her husband's dream. "And I'm thinking that maybe it's also where it ends, or where something new begins." Luke took her hand. "I've been doing some research. The lot next to this one is available. It's bigger, better positioned. We could build something there. Not just a bakery, a real business. Harper's Bakery and Provisions. Wholesale and retail, with enough space for expansion." "We?" Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "If you'll have me as a partner, silent partner if you prefer. This would be your business, your vision. I'd just provide the capital and the support." Evelyn looked at their joined hands, at the man who'd stood beside her through fire and threats and the darkest moments of her life. "What if I want you to be more than a silent partner?" Luke's breath caught. "Evelyn, what if I want you to be a full partner, in business and in life?" She turned to face him fully. "I'm not asking for romance or fairy tales. I'm asking if you're willing to build something real with me, something messy and complicated and absolutely authentic." "Yes." The answer came without hesitation. "To all of it. Business, life, messiness, complications. Yes." They stood there in the ruins of the old dream, building the foundation for a new one, while around them Redstone Crossing slowly became the town it had always had the potential to be. A place where courage mattered more than money, where community meant something, where a widow and a rancher could stand against tyranny and win. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Rhodes would fight the charges, would spend his fortune on legal defenses, would make their lives difficult from prison if he could. But for the first time in 3 years, Evelyn wasn't afraid of what came next. She had Sarah, she had Luke, she had a town that had finally learned to fight for itself. And she had the unshakable knowledge that when pushed to her absolute limit, she hadn't broken. She'd forged herself into something stronger. The trial of Marcus Rhodes began on a cold morning in late October, 6 weeks after his arrest. The territorial courthouse in Denver was packed with spectators who'd traveled from across 3 territories to witness the fall of a man who'd seemed untouchable for so long. Evelyn sat in the front row, Luke on one side and Sarah on the other, watching as the man who'd tried to kill them was led into the courtroom in chains. Rhodes had aged in those 6 weeks. His silver hair had gone gray, his distinguished features sagging into something that looked almost human. But when his eyes met Evelyn's across the courtroom, the hatred there was as fresh and venomous as ever. "Don't look at him," Luke murmured, his hand finding hers. "I need to." Evelyn squeezed his fingers. "I need to see him face justice for what he did." The prosecution's case was devastating. Catherine Mills, acting as lead counsel, methodically presented the evidence they'd gathered over those intense weeks, the testimonies, the financial records, the documented pattern of fraud and intimidation. Witness after witness took the stand, ordinary people from Redstone Crossing who'd finally found the courage to speak their truth. Tom Barrett described how Rhodes had advised him to expand his livery business, then foreclosed before the expansion could generate profit. Mrs. Sullivan wept as she recounted the threats Rhodes had made when she refused to sell. Martin Hayes confessed to his complicity, explaining how Rhodes had used blackmail to control him for years. But the most damaging testimony came from Isabella. She took the stand wearing a simple gray dress, her hair pulled back without ornament, looking younger and more vulnerable than Evelyn had ever seen her. Rhodes stared at his daughter with an expression that cycled between fury and something that might have been betrayal. "Miss Rhodes," Catherine began gently, "please tell the court about the evening of September 14th. Isabella's voice was steady despite the tremor in her hands. "My father was in his study, drinking. He was angry about Mrs. Harper's partnership with Mr. Carter, about the investigation they were conducting. He said legal methods weren't working fast enough." "What did he say specifically?" "He said," Isabella's voice caught, then strengthened. "He said the only way to break Luke Carter's support was to remove Evelyn Harper entirely. He said she was the symbol of resistance, and symbols could be destroyed." "Did he explain how he intended to destroy this symbol?" "Yes. He made 2 telephone calls that evening. I heard him tell someone to handle the Harper situation permanently. He said to make it look like an accident, but that the timing wasn't critical." Isabella looked directly at her father. "He said acceptable losses were part of any campaign." Rhodes' lawyer objected strenuously, claiming the testimony was hearsay and prejudicial. The judge overruled him. The evidence was too substantial, the corroboration too thorough. Isabella's testimony was just one piece of an overwhelming case. The defense tried to argue that Rhodes was a respected businessman being persecuted by competitors. They claimed the fire was indeed an accident, that the financial irregularities were simple bookkeeping errors, that the witnesses were lying for personal gain. But every argument crumbled under Catherine's relentless cross-examination. The trial lasted 3 weeks. At the end, the jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. The judge's sentencing was swift and merciless. 25 years for conspiracy to commit murder, with additional consecutive sentences for fraud, extortion, and racketeering. Marcus Rhodes would spend the rest of his life in prison. As the marshals led him away, Rhodes turned one final time toward Evelyn. His mouth shaped words she couldn't hear over the courtroom commotion, but she could read his lips clearly enough. "This isn't over." Evelyn stood, met his gaze with calm certainty, and mouthed back, "Yes, it is." The aftermath of the trial brought changes that rippled through the territory like stones dropped in still water. The Rhodes Bank was dissolved, its assets distributed among those Rhodes had defrauded. Properties were returned to their rightful owners. Debts were forgiven. The territorial governor personally apologized to Redstone Crossing for the oversight that had allowed such corruption to flourish. But the most significant changes were quieter, more personal. Evelyn stood on the new lot beside her burned bakery, watching as construction crews framed out the building that would become Harper's Bakery and Provisions. It was larger than the original, with space for 4 ovens, a proper storage room, a small cafe area where customers could sit and enjoy their purchases. Luke had insisted on adding living quarters on the second floor, comfortable rooms with proper windows and a view of Main Street. "You're thinking too hard," Mary Chen said, coming to stand beside her. Mary had become more than an employee. She was a friend, a confidant, someone who understood what it meant to rebuild after loss. "I'm thinking about how strange it is," Evelyn said. 6 months ago, I was barely surviving. Now I'm building something bigger than I ever imagined. You earned it. You fought for it. We fought for it." Evelyn gestured to encompass not just the construction site, but the entire town. Everyone who stood up to Rhodes, everyone who testified, everyone who refused to let fear win, this is as much their victory as mine. Maybe, but you were the one who started it. You were the one who screamed at a stranger in the street and set everything in motion. Evelyn laughed, remembering that scorching morning that felt like a lifetime ago. "I can't decide if that was the stupidest or bravest thing I've ever done." "Both," Mary said with a grin. "Definitely both." Sarah appeared from around the construction site, her dress dusty and her face glowing with excitement. "Mama, Mr. Luke says they're putting in the windows tomorrow. Can we watch?" "We'll see, sweetheart. Please? I want to see everything. I want to remember how we built it." Sarah's expression grew serious beyond her years. "Papa built the old bakery, but we're building this one. I want to remember that." The simple profundity of it made Evelyn's throat tighten. Sarah had been so young when James died, her memories of him already fading into impressions rather than concrete recollections. But this building, this business, this new life, would be something she'd remember in vivid detail. "We'll watch together," Evelyn promised. Luke emerged from the construction site, sawdust in his hair and a satisfied expression on his face. He'd been surprisingly hands-on with the building process, working alongside the hired crews, insisting on quality in every detail. Watching him now, Evelyn felt something warm and settled in her chest. Not the passionate intensity of her love for James, but something equally valuable. Partnership. Trust. The quiet certainty of someone who'd stand beside her through whatever came next. "The foreman says we'll be ready to open in 3 weeks," Luke announced. 2 if the weather holds. 3 weeks. Evelyn tested the timeline, feeling a flutter of anxiety mixed with excitement. "That's fast. Too fast?" "No, perfect actually." She looked at the building taking shape, at Sarah chattering with the workers, at Mary making notes about equipment placement. "I'm ready to move forward." Luke's hand found hers, familiar and steady. "Speaking of moving forward, there's something I wanted to discuss with you, privately." They walked away from the construction noise, finding relative quiet near the blackened ruins of the original bakery. Someone had already started clearing the debris, preparing the lot for eventual sale or development. Soon there would be no physical evidence that Harper's first bakery had ever existed, except in memory and in the strength it had forged in those who'd fought for it. "What's on your mind?" Evelyn asked. Luke was uncharacteristically hesitant, a man who usually approached everything with decisive confidence, suddenly looking uncertain. "I've been thinking about the future, about what we're building together." "The bakery." "Not just the bakery." He turned to face her fully. "Evelyn, these past months with you and Sarah, they've been the best of my life. Not because of the business success or because we defeated Rhodes, but because for the first time since I lost everything in Colorado, I felt like I have a home." Evelyn's heart began to race. "Luke, let me finish." He pulled a small box from his pocket, and Evelyn's breath caught. "I know this isn't romantic. I know we're standing in ruins talking about practical matters, but that feels right for us. We're not the people who need grand gestures or perfect moments. We're the people who build something real from ashes and determination." He opened the box, revealing a simple gold band with a small diamond. Nothing ostentatious, nothing that screamed wealth or status. It was honest and straightforward, like everything else about Luke. "Evelyn Harper, will you marry me? Will you let me be a father to Sarah, a partner in your business, and whatever else you need me to be? I'm not asking you to forget James or to pretend this is some fairy tale romance. I'm asking if you'll build a life with me, messy and complicated and absolutely real." Evelyn looked at the ring, then at Luke's face, Then it's Sarah playing in the distance. She thought about James, about the love they'd shared and the dreams they'd built. She thought about the widow she'd been 6 months ago, angry and desperate, and convinced she'd spend the rest of her life alone. And she thought about the woman she'd become, stronger, braver, capable of choosing her own future instead of just surviving it. Yes, she said simply. To all of it, yes. Luke's smile transformed his entire face. He slipped the ring on her finger and it fit perfectly, like it had been made specifically for her, for this moment, for this new life they were building together. Sarah's delighted shriek cut through the moment. Somehow, she'd noticed from across the construction site, and now she was running toward them at full speed. "Mama! Mama! Is Mr. Luke going to be my papa now?" Evelyn caught her daughter in her arms, laughing through sudden tears. "If that's all right with you." "It's perfect." Sarah threw her arms around Luke's neck. "I get a papa and a new bakery and everything." The simplicity of childhood joy, the uncomplicated happiness of a child who'd lost one father and was gaining another without seeing it as replacement or betrayal, it was exactly what Evelyn needed to silence the small voice of guilt that whispered she was betraying James's memory. But James would have wanted this, would have wanted Sarah to have a father, would have wanted Evelyn to find partnership and love again, would have wanted them to build something beautiful from the ruins of grief. "When can we tell everyone?" Sarah demanded. "Soon, sweetheart, very soon." The news spread through Redstone Crossing like wildfire, greeted with genuine celebration from a town that had learned to recognize real happiness when they saw it. Mrs. Fletcher organized an impromptu engagement party at the boarding house. Tom Barrett provided flowers from his wife's garden. Even stern Mrs. Chen admitted to being cautiously pleased about the match. But the most meaningful response came in a letter that arrived 3 days after the engagement, forwarded from Isabella's new address in Philadelphia. "Dear Evelyn, I heard about your engagement through the territorial papers. I wanted to write and offer my congratulations, though I'm not sure I have any right to do so after everything my family put you through. I've been thinking a lot about choices lately, about the ones I made, the ones I should have made sooner, and the ones I'm making now. You gave me a choice when you came to the mansion that day, a chance to be something other than my father's accomplice. I'm trying every day to be worthy of that gift. I've enrolled in a business college here in Philadelphia. I'm learning to manage accounts honestly, to build enterprises that help rather than harm. It's harder than I expected doing things the right way, but it's also more rewarding than anything I did while working for my father. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that watching you fight, watching you refuse to break even when my father did everything in his power to destroy you, taught me something important. It taught me that strength isn't about controlling others. It's about refusing to be controlled. I hope you and Mr. Carter build something beautiful together. I hope your daughter grows up knowing how brave her mother is. And I hope that someday, when enough time has passed, you'll be able to think of me without hatred." With respect and regret, Isabella Evelyn read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in the small box where she kept important documents. She didn't know if she could fully forgive Isabella. The wounds were too fresh, the memories of terror too vivid, but she could acknowledge growth when she saw it, could recognize the courage it took to remake yourself after being complicit in terrible things. Maybe someday they'd both have moved far enough past the trauma to rebuild some kind of relationship. Or maybe they'd remain forever connected only by shared history and mutual respect from a distance. Either way, Evelyn could wish Isabella well in her new life while focusing on building her own. The bakery opened on a bright November morning, 3 weeks ahead of schedule. Evelyn stood in the doorway as the sun rose, taking in the gleaming ovens, the polished counters, the smell of fresh bread that had filled the building since 4 a.m. When she and Mary had started the first batch, it was perfect. It was also terrifying. "Having second thoughts?" Luke asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "About the bakery?" "Never. About whether I can actually make this work?" "Constantly." "You'll make it work. You made the old bakery work under impossible circumstances. This one has every advantage. This one also has expectations. People are going to judge it against what came before, against James's vision." "Evelyn." Luke turned her to face him. "This isn't James's bakery, it's yours. You've earned the right to build something new, something that reflects who you are now, not who you were 3 years ago." Stop apologizing for moving forward. He was right, as he so often was. Evelyn took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and walked to the front door. At exactly 7 o'clock, she flipped the sign from closed to open and unlocked the entrance. The response was overwhelming. Customers began arriving within minutes, not just from Redstone Crossing, but from neighboring towns who'd read about the trial and wanted to support the woman who'd stood up to corruption. By noon, they'd sold out of bread and had to bake emergency batches just to meet demand. By evening, Evelyn had taken orders that would keep them busy for the next month. "This is insane," Mary said, laughing as she counted the day's receipts. "We made more today than the old bakery made in a good week." "It won't last," Evelyn cautioned, though she couldn't suppress her own smile. "Once the novelty wears off, then we'll keep them coming back with quality." Luke had spent the day helping manage the crowds, learning the business from the ground up, with the same intensity he brought to ranching. That's what built your reputation before, and it's what will sustain it now. Sarah appeared from the back room where she'd been helping by staying out of the way and entertaining herself with drawing. "Mama, look what I made." She held up a drawing of the bakery, rendered in a child's enthusiastic scrawl, but recognizable nonetheless. In the window, she'd drawn 3 stick figures, one tall, one medium, one small. A family. "That's beautiful, sweetheart." Evelyn hung the drawing prominently on the wall behind the counter. "That's going to be the first decoration in our new bakery." The days that followed established a rhythm that felt both familiar and entirely new. Evelyn and Mary handled the baking, working in the comfortable partnership they'd developed. Luke managed the business side, using his experience and connections to secure favorable contracts and expand their distribution. Sarah attended the small school that had reopened once Rhodes's intimidation had ended, returning each afternoon to do her homework in the bakery's small cafe area while the comforting smell of bread surrounded her. It was ordinary. It was also perfect. 2 months after the bakery opened, Evelyn and Luke were married in a simple ceremony at the town hall. Sarah stood between them, holding both their hands, beaming with the joy of a child who'd finally gotten the family she'd been hoping for. The entire town attended, packing the small space and spilling out into the street. Mrs. Chen cried openly. Tom Barrett gave Luke a gruff handshake and told him he'd better treat his new family right. Even Martin Hayes, slowly rebuilding his own reputation, offered tentative congratulations. There was no honeymoon. They couldn't afford to close the bakery for extended periods yet. Instead, they spent a quiet weekend at Luke's ranch, just the 3 of them, talking about the future and making plans that ranged from practical to wildly ambitious. "I want to expand into preserves next year," Evelyn said as they sat on the porch watching Sarah play with a litter of barn kittens. "Local fruits, traditional recipes, maybe some of the ones James's mother used to make." "I think that's perfect." Luke's arm was around her shoulders, solid and warm. "What else?" "I want to hire more widows. Women like me who are struggling, who need a chance to build something of their own. The bakery could be more than just a business. It could be a place where people learn they're stronger than they think they are." "Like you did. Like we all did." Evelyn leaned into him, feeling contentment settle over her like a well-worn quilt. "This town learned to fight back. I want to honor that." "We will." Luke kissed the top of her head. "We'll build something that matters. Something that lasts." Spring came to Redstone Crossing with a burst of wildflowers that painted the hills in vibrant colors. The bakery continued to thrive, expanding its offerings and its reputation. Evelyn hired 3 more women, all widows, all struggling, all grateful for the opportunity to prove themselves. The cafe area became a gathering place where townspeople met to discuss business, share news, and slowly rebuild the sense of community that Rhodes had nearly destroyed. Luke's offer to buy out Rhodes Bank mortgages had transformed the town's economic landscape. Small businesses flourished without the weight of predatory debt. New enterprises opened. People started investing in improvements, expansions, futures they'd been too afraid to imagine before. And Evelyn watched it all unfold with a sense of wonder that never quite faded. Some mornings, she still woke up expecting to find herself back in the cramped rooms above the old bakery, still struggling, still alone. Then she'd feel Luke beside her, hear Sarah laughing in the next room, smell bread baking in the ovens downstairs, and remember that this was real. 1 year after the fire, Evelyn stood in front of the empty lot where the original bakery had stood. The ruins had been cleared months ago, but she hadn't been able to bring herself to decide what to do with the property. Luke had suggested selling it, suggested building something new, suggested a dozen practical uses. But Evelyn had hesitated, holding on to it for reasons she couldn't quite articulate. Sarah found her there, slipping her small hand into Evelyn's larger one. At 7 years old, she was growing quickly, already showing signs of the woman she'd become. Strong, thoughtful, unafraid to ask difficult questions. "Mama, why do we keep this place empty?" "I'm not sure, baby. Maybe because it feels wrong to forget what happened here." "But we don't need to keep the place to remember." Sarah's logic was irrefutable. "We remember Papa every day. We remember the fire. We remember being brave. This is just dirt." "Out of the mouths of children." Evelyn laughed softly, realizing her daughter was absolutely right. "What do you think we should do with it?" Sarah considered seriously. "Make it beautiful. Make it something that helps people, like the bakery does, but different." "Like what?" "A garden?" Sarah's face lit up with the idea. "A garden where people can come and sit when they're sad, with flowers like the ones Mr. Luke brought you that first time, and maybe a bench with Papa's name on it, so people remember he was good." The simplicity and generosity of the idea took Evelyn's breath away. A memorial garden, not just for James, but for everyone who'd suffered under Rhodes's tyranny. A place of beauty built on ground that had seen so much pain. "I think that's perfect," Evelyn said. "I think your Papa would love it." They built the garden over the next 6 months, the entire town contributing labor and materials. Tom Barrett constructed the benches. Mrs. Chen donated plants from her own garden. The school children helped with the planting, each one choosing a flower to place in honor of someone they loved. When it opened on a warm September afternoon, exactly 2 years after the fire, the garden was a riot of color and life. Wildflowers mingled with cultivated roses, native grasses waved beside imported tulips, and in the center stood a simple stone marker that read, "In memory of James Harper and all those who built this town with courage and hope, may we never forget that ordinary people can do extraordinary things." The dedication ceremony was small but meaningful. Evelyn spoke briefly about James, about the dreams they'd shared and the legacy he'd left. Luke talked about the importance of remembering struggle while celebrating progress. And Sarah, who'd helped design the garden, explained in her clear child's voice why beauty mattered in places that had known pain. As the crowd dispersed to explore the new garden, Evelyn found herself alone by the memorial stone. She traced James's name with gentle fingers, feeling the warmth of sun-heated granite beneath her touch. "I hope you're proud," she whispered. "I hope you know that Sarah's happy, that she's loved, that she's growing up strong and brave, just like you wanted. I hope you're at peace with the choices I've made." The wind stirred the flowers, carrying the scent of roses and wild lupine. Evelyn chose to take it as answer enough. She turned to find Luke and Sarah waiting at the garden's edge, patient and understanding. Her family, not the one she'd planned for, but the one life had given her when the plans fell apart. Imperfect, complicated, and absolutely real. "Ready to go home?" Luke asked. Home. Not the boarding house, not Luke's ranch, not even just the bakery. Home was this town, these people, this life they'd built together from ashes and determination. "Yes," Evelyn said, taking his hand and Sarah's. "I'm ready." They walked down Main Street together as evening light painted everything golden. The bakery's windows glowed warmly, promising tomorrow's bread. Neighbors called greetings from their storefronts. Somewhere, a dog barked, and children laughed, and life continued in all its ordinary, extraordinary glory. Evelyn had started this journey as a desperate widow screaming at a stranger in the street, pushed past endurance and certain she had nothing left to lose. She'd survived fire and threats and the systematic cruelty of a powerful man who'd wanted to break her. But she hadn't broken. Instead, she'd discovered strength she didn't know she possessed. Part 1. She'd learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the refusal to let fear make your choices. The bakery awaited, warm and welcoming and supported well enough, could stand against tyranny and win. The bakery awaited, warm and welcoming and full of tomorrow's possibilities. Sarah chattered about school, about her friends, about the kittens at Luke's ranch who were almost old enough to leave their mother. Luke's hand was steady in hers, his presence a quiet assurance that she'd never have to face darkness alone again. And Evelyn, once just a widow trying to survive, now a wife and mother and business owner and symbol of resistance, walked into her future with her head high and her heart full. The story that had begun with fury and desperation had become something else entirely, a testament to resilience, a proof that family could be chosen as well as born, and a reminder that endings could also be beginnings if you were brave enough to build them. She had been brave enough. They all had, and that made all the difference.